The morning broke cold and colorless over the marshlands, the kind of dawn that felt less like beginning and more like the world reluctantly admitting it hadn't ended during the night. Gandalf stood at the crest of a low ridge, staff planted firmly in the muddy ground, studying the landscape ahead with the focused intensity of someone reading a map written in a language only half remembered. "That's it," he said quietly, though whether he was confirming it to himself or announcing it to his companions was unclear. The landmark from the warden's vision, a stone bridge over Blackwater, marked with iron and crown. Aragorn moved up beside him, eyes scanning the terrain with the practiced assessment of someone who'd spent more years in wilderness than civilization. "I see the bridge, or what's left of it. One span collapsed, one still standing, ruins beyond, but the water, unnaturally dark," Gandalf finished. "I noticed. That's not just tannin from peat or rotting vegetation. There's something else, something deliberate, corrupting the flow." The river below them was indeed black, not the healthy dark of deep, clear water, but an opaque, oily darkness that seemed to swallow light rather than reflect it. Even from this distance, perhaps half a mile, the wrongness was palpable. No birds fished its surface. No insects danced above it. The vegetation along its banks grew sparse and stunted, leaning away as if the water itself was toxic to proximity. Stella joined them, pulling her cloak tighter against the wind that had picked up, carrying with it a smell that made her nose wrinkle. "Metallic," she said, "like old blood and rust. Is that normal for rivers in this region?" "Nothing about this region is normal anymore," Aragorn replied, his hand resting on his sword hilt in unconscious readiness. "We've been walking through wrongness for the last 2 days, fewer birds each mile. The wind doesn't sound right, too flat, like it's forgotten how to whistle through trees. Even the mud feels different underfoot." He wasn't exaggerating. The land they'd been crossing had grown progressively bleaker as they'd followed the warden's directions east from the Bridge of Kings. What had started as merely uninviting countryside had gradually transformed into something more actively hostile, not in the sense of immediate danger, but in the way it seemed to reject habitation, to discourage presence, to make travelers feel fundamentally unwelcome. Alfharin had been ranging ahead, nose to the ground, following trails invisible to human eyes. Now the wolf returned, moving with the economical efficiency of an apex predator that never wasted energy on unnecessary display. He sat beside Gandalf, looking up at the wizard with eyes that held more intelligence than most humans Gandalf had met. "What have you found, friend?" Gandalf asked, kneeling to place one hand on the wolf's thick silver-gray fur. Alfharin turned his head, gesturing with his muzzle toward 2 different directions. Then he performed a behavior Gandalf had learned to interpret. He pawed the ground twice, sharp and deliberate, his signal for different things, both important. 2 trails, Gandalf translated for the others. He's distinguishing between them deliberately, which means they're significantly different in character. "Cult?" Aragorn asked. "Almost certainly one of them. Alfharin recognizes their scent markers by now. That black wax they use, the particular herbs in their ritual preparations. But the other..." Gandalf studied the wolf's posture, the way his ears were slightly back, the tension in his shoulders. "The other trail bothers him. Something heavier, older. He's picking up stone dust and... what would you call it, friend? Cave smell? Underground dampness?" Alfharin confirmed with a short, sharp bark. "Cave musk," Aragorn said, understanding immediately. "Something that lives underground, in stone and wet darkness. Large, given that Alfharin's concerned about it, and the wolf doesn't scare easily." "The vision showed more than just a bridge," Gandalf said, straightening and gazing toward the structure again. It showed something beneath, something the cult was using, deliberately agitating. I assumed it was metaphorical, danger lurking under the surface, hidden threats, but perhaps it was more literal than I gave it credit for. Stella had been quiet, her expression troubled in a way that suggested she was accessing memories she'd rather leave buried. Now she spoke, voice carefully controlled. The cult has a practice they call crowning. I heard about it during my time with them, though I never witnessed it directly. My cell wasn't senior enough for that level of operation, but the rumors were disturbing. "Explain," Gandalf said, not unkindly, but with clear urgency. "It's not about making someone a king," Stella continued, choosing her words with care. "It's about making someone a vessel, a singer-carrier, they called it, someone who can speak the key song, the binding songs that control the seals, without personally bearing the cost." "That should be impossible," Gandalf said flatly. "The binding songs are structured precisely to prevent that kind of exploitation. The power and the price are inseparable. That's the entire point, to ensure only those willing to sacrifice can wield such authority." "Should be impossible," Stella agreed. "But the cult believes they've found a workaround. They crown someone, perform a ritual that designates them as the singer, but they also bind substitutes, living people who are forced to bear the cost instead. The singer speaks the words and shapes the power, but the substitutes pay the price, their memories, their vitality, sometimes their lives." The silence that followed was heavy with implications. Finally, Aragorn spoke, his voice tight with controlled anger. "That's obscene. It's not just breaking the seals. It's perverting the entire structure of the magic, turning a safeguard into a weapon." "Yes," Stella said simply. "That's why I left, among other reasons." Gandalf studied the bridge again, seeing it now not just as a landmark but as a trap, a carefully prepared killing ground. If they're attempting a crowning ritual here, they'll need specific conditions. A place of power, certainly. Symbolic resonance. The bridge represents crossing, transition, liminality, and they'll need victims, multiple substitutes, prepared and bound. "We need to move," Aragorn said. "Every hour we delay is an hour they have to complete their preparations." They descended from the ridge, moving as quickly as caution allowed through terrain that grew increasingly treacherous. The path, such as it was, wound between standing water and patches of ground that looked solid but proved deceptively soft. Twice, Stella nearly stepped into sinkholes concealed by surface vegetation, saved only by Aragorn's warning and Alfharin's positioning to block her path. As they drew closer to the bridge, details became clearer. The structure was ancient. That much was obvious even from a distance. The stonework showed the characteristic precision of elder days construction, each block fitted with mathematical perfection that modern masons could no longer achieve. But age had taken its toll. The northern span had collapsed entirely, massive blocks tumbled into the Blackwater below, while the southern span remained intact, but showed concerning cracks and gaps where mortar had failed. At the bridge's southern approach stood the ruins of what had once been a substantial gatehouse, 3 stories tall originally, judging by the remnant walls, with arrow slits and machicolations suggesting serious defensive architecture. Now only 2 walls stood fully, the others reduced to rubble that nearly blocked the approach road. "This was a guarded crossing," Aragorn observed, moving into professional assessment mode. "Major strategic position, heavily fortified. Look at the sight lines. Whoever held this bridge controlled movement through the entire valley. You couldn't bypass it easily. The marshlands extend for miles in both directions." "Old boundary stones," Gandalf added, pointing to weathered markers barely visible in the overgrown verges. Each was carved with symbols in a script even older than the bridge itself. This was more than just strategic. It was a formal border, a place where oaths were sworn, where authority was recognized and enforced. Which makes it perfect for what the cult wants, Stella said grimly. They're not just looking for power. They're looking for legitimacy. If they can perform their crowning ritual at a place historically associated with authority and oath-binding, it strengthens their claim that what they're doing is valid restoration rather than criminal perversion. Alfharin had been investigating the approaches, nose working overtime, occasionally pawing at the ground or sniffing intensely at particular spots. Now he returned and performed an elaborate series of gestures, circling twice, pawing 3 times, then sitting and looking directly at Gandalf while tilting his head toward the bridge ruins. Recent activity, Gandalf interpreted. Multiple people. He circles for groups rather than individuals, and the pawing means within the last day or 2. They're here, or they were very recently. Do we have a count? Aragorn asked. Gandalf conferred silently with the wolf through their bond, reading nuances of posture and micro-expressions that conveyed information more precisely than words. At least a dozen, possibly more. Alfharin can't give exact numbers when scents overlap this heavily, but he's confident it's significant force, not just a scouting party. A dozen cultists, likely armed, definitely prepared with magic, Aragorn assessed clinically. Plus whatever they've got lurking under that bridge, if your vision was accurate, against the 4 of us. He glanced at Stella. No offense, but how much combat experience do you actually have? Almost none, Stella admitted. I can defend myself in a tavern brawl, maybe, but a real fight against trained opponents? I'd be a liability. Honesty is valuable, Gandalf said. We work with what we have, not what we wish we had. Your knowledge of cult practices is worth more than sword skill right now. You tell us what to expect. We'll handle the violence. They paused at a small copse of twisted willows about 200 yards from the bridge, using the concealment to make final preparations and observations. From here they could see the Gatehouse ruins more clearly, and what they saw was not encouraging. Fresh activity was obvious even at this distance, cleared paths through rubble that had been undisturbed for decades, new rope visible on remaining walls, and most tellingly, thin smoke rising from somewhere within the ruins, not cooking fire smoke, but the gray-white smoke of ritual incense, carrying that distinctive acrid smell Gandalf had learned to associate with cult ceremonies. They're in position, he said quietly. Probably have been for at least a day, maybe longer. Time to prepare their ground, set their protections, ready their substitutes. Then we're already behind, Aragorn said. We need to move now, while we might still catch them mid-preparation, rather than waiting until they're fully ready. Agreed, but carefully. Alfharin, scout ahead. Silent approach, observe only. If you're detected, retreat immediately. We need information more than we need surprise. The wolf melted into the marsh grass, moving with the fluid silence that always amazed Gandalf, despite years of partnership. One moment he was there, the next he was simply absent, reality flowing closed behind him like water. They waited in tense silence, each minute stretching longer than the last. Aragorn kept watch on multiple approaches, hand never straying far from his sword. Stella seemed to be steadying herself, breathing deliberately, preparing mentally for whatever came next. Gandalf simply stood, staff planted, extending his awareness as far as he dared, reading the land, feeling the currents of power that flowed through this place, sensing the wrongness that had been deliberately cultivated here. When Alfharin returned, moving urgently but not panicked, his message was complex enough that Gandalf needed several minutes to interpret fully through their shared understanding. The gatehouse has guards, at least 3 visible, probably more concealed, he finally reported. They're alert but not alarmed, which means they don't know we're here yet. Inside the ruins he sensed multiple people, heard chanting, low, rhythmic, the kind of sustained ritual work that takes hours. And beneath, Gandalf paused, troubled by what he was reading from the wolf's memory. Beneath, something moves, something large, slow, old. It breathes stone dust and sleeps in wet darkness. And it's aware, not asleep, not truly, more like waiting. The thing under the bridge, Aragorn said. Your vision's literal meaning. Yes, and the cult knows it's there. They're not just using this site despite the danger. They're using it because of the danger. Whatever's down there, they want it active, aggressive, territorial. It's part of their defense. Then we'll have to deal with it, Aragorn said with the flat pragmatism of someone who'd faced impossible odds enough times to stop being impressed by them. Along with the cultists, the ritual, and whatever other surprises they've prepared. Yes, Gandalf agreed, though not necessarily in that order, and ideally not all at once. We need a plan that's more sophisticated than charge in and hope for the best. They withdrew slightly further into the willows and huddled close, speaking in whispers, mapping their approach while the sun climbed higher, and the smoke from the gatehouse continued its steady rise into the gray morning sky. Somewhere ahead, in ruins built to guard a crossing that had outlasted the kingdoms that built it, a cult prepared to pervert ancient magic and sacrifice innocent lives to achieve their goals. And beneath it all, in darkness and wet stone, something ancient stirred at the sound of ritual chanting, growing more aware, more awake, more dangerous with each passing hour. The stage was set. The players were in position. All that remained was to see who would survive the performance. The approach to the bridge followed what had once been a proper military road, wide enough for supply wagons, paved with fitted stone that engineering of 3 ages past had laid to last millennia. Time and neglect had broken that promise. Sections had subsided into marsh, others were overgrown with thorny scrub, and in places the pavement had been deliberately torn up, leaving gaps that forced travelers onto narrow verges where ambush was easy. Defensive degradation, Aragorn observed, studying the pattern of damage. Someone systematically destroyed the road's integrity while leaving it barely passable. Forces approaching the bridge to bunch up, slow down, lose formation. Recent work? Gandalf asked. Some old, some new. The worst gaps are decades old, probably from when this crossing was first abandoned. But see those fresh tool marks? Someone's been maintaining the damage, making sure the road stays difficult. The cult preparing their ground, Stella said. They'd want to control approaches, make it hard for reinforcements or interference to reach them quickly. They moved cautiously, Alfharin ranging slightly ahead, nose working constantly. The wolf's behavior had shifted from alert to actively concerned, his ears swiveling at sounds too faint for human hearing, his pace becoming more measured, more deliberate. The road curved around a low hillock covered in gorse, and as they rounded it they found the first bodies. 3 of them, or what remained. They'd been dead perhaps 2 days, judging by the state of decay and scavenger damage. 2 appeared to be travelers, merchants or pilgrims based on their clothing and the scattered remnants of packs. The 3rd wore boiled leather armor and had carried weapons now missing. Dragged here after being killed elsewhere, Aragorn said, crouching to examine the scene without touching the corpses. See the trail marks in the mud? They were moved post-mortem, probably to clear the road or hide evidence. Or to feed something, Gandalf added grimly, noting the distinctive pattern of the wounds. These aren't clean kills. These are maulings. Something with considerable strength literally tore them apart. Orcs? Stella suggested, her face pale but her voice steady. Possibly. The damage is consistent with orcish savagery, but look at the surrounding area. No camp refuse, no dropped weapons, no orcish trail sign. If orcs killed these people, they did it elsewhere and brought only the bodies here. Alfharin had been circling the area at a wider radius, and now he stopped suddenly, hackles rising, a low growl building in his chest. He was focused on a section of broken wall perhaps 30 yards ahead, where the old road passed through ruins of what might have been a toll house or guard station. "We have company," Aragorn said quietly, his sword sliding from its sheath, with barely a whisper of steel on leather. "Stay close to Gandalf, Stella. Don't engage unless absolutely necessary." The attack came with the sudden explosive violence typical of orc tactics. 4 of them burst from concealment, 2 from behind the ruined wall, 1 from a drainage culvert, 1 from scrub growth that should have been too thin to hide anything larger than a rabbit. They were small as orcs went, probably scouts or scavengers rather than warriors, but still dangerous, armed with crude blades and moving with the predatory coordination of pack hunters. The first orc died before it had taken 3 steps. Aragorn moved with the economical precision of someone who'd spent decades perfecting the art of staying alive in impossible situations. His blade caught the orc's charge, redirected it, and opened its throat in a single fluid motion. The creature went down in a spray of black blood, gurgling wetly. The second orc, seeing its companion fall, tried to adjust its attack vector, going low, attempting to hamstring Aragorn rather than engaging directly. It didn't account for Alfharin. The wolf hit it from the side with the full force of his considerable mass, driving it off balance. Then his jaws closed on its weapon arm with bone-crushing pressure. The orc shrieked and dropped its blade. Alfharin released and immediately struck again, this time at the throat, silencing the scream with terminal efficiency. The third orc showed more intelligence than its companions. Instead of charging into melee where Aragorn and Alfharin had already demonstrated superiority, it went for Gandalf, correctly identifying the wizard as potentially more vulnerable and certainly more valuable as a hostage or quick kill. It nearly succeeded. The orc was fast, and it had positioned itself well, coming from an angle that required Gandalf to turn and expose himself to get his staff into defensive position. For a critical half-second, the wizard was genuinely at risk. Then Gandalf spoke a single word, not loudly, not dramatically, just with absolute certainty and command, and the air between him and the charging orcs suddenly became thick, resistant, like trying to run through honey. The orc's momentum died, its blade strikes slowing to manageable speed, and Gandalf simply stepped aside while bringing his staff around in a sharp arc that caught the creature across the temple with a crack like breaking pottery. The orc dropped, unconscious or dead. Gandalf didn't particularly care which. The fourth orc, demonstrating the survival instinct that had kept it alive when smarter orcs died, broke and ran. It made it perhaps 20 yards before Aragorn's thrown knife, a precise, practiced throw with decades of muscle memory behind it, took it in the back of the leg, sending it tumbling. It tried to crawl, whimpering in fear and pain, but Alfharin was already there, standing over it, growling a warning that needed no translation: stay down or die. The entire fight had lasted perhaps 30 seconds. "Secure it," Gandalf ordered. moving toward the wounded orc while keeping his staff ready. "I want information before it dies, or we kill it." Aragorn retrieved his knife, cleaning it on the orc's filthy tunic before returning it to his belt, then roughly flipped the creature onto its back. The orc snarled weakly, black blood pooling from the leg wound, but made no serious attempt to resist. Fear had replaced aggression in its yellow eyes. "You speak Western?" Gandalf asked in that language, knowing full well most orcs had at least basic comprehension, even if they preferred their own foul tongues. The orc spat, more reflex than defiance, but nodded slightly. "Good. Then understand this. You're going to die here, that's certain. The only question is how much it hurts and how long it takes. Cooperate, and I'll make it quick. Resist, and I'll let my friend hear." He gestured to Alfharin, who growled on cue. "Take his time. He's very patient when he wants to be." What you want?" the orc managed, voice wet with pain and terror. "The bridge. The ruins. Tell me what's there. How many? What defenses? What are they guarding?" The orc's eyes darted between Gandalf, Aragorn, and the bodies of its companions, calculating. Orcs weren't stupid, just vicious and short-sighted. This one was trying to determine if cooperation would actually buy it anything or if it was doomed regardless. "Speak quickly," Aragorn added coldly. "My patience has limits, and we're wasting time we don't have." "Cult," the orc spat finally. "Man cult. Crazy singers. They use the old place, pay us in meat and gear to keep watch, kill travelers, feed the—" It stopped abruptly, fear spiking in its expression. "Feed what?" Gandalf pressed. "What's under the bridge?" "Stone Eater," the orc whispered. "Old thing. Sleeps in deep water and stone. Cult wakes it, keeps it angry, makes it kill anyone comes close. We just take leavings. Bodies, gear. We don't go near the deep places. Stone Eater don't like us either." "How many cultists?" "Dozen, maybe more. Change always. Some come, some go. And they got prisoners, people in cages, for the singing thing they do." "What singing thing?" Stella asked, stepping closer despite Aragorn's warning gesture. "What exactly are they doing with the prisoners?" The orc's eyes fixed on her, and something like recognition flickered. You smell like them. Like the singers. You're one of—" "I was," Stella interrupted sharply. "Not anymore." "What are they doing with the prisoners?" "Making them echo, mirror? Don't know the word. They sing at prisoners. Prisoners sing back, but wrong, broken. And prisoners get sick, weak, dead. And the crowned one gets strong." The orc coughed, black blood flecking its lips. "We heard it. Night singing. Makes the Stone Eater crazy. Makes everything crazy." Gandalf and Stella exchanged a look. "The substitutes," she said. "They're using them as resonators, amplifying the binding songs through human voices while transferring the cost. And it's not just theoretical. They're actually doing it." "How many prisoners?" Gandalf asked the orc. 6, maybe 8. Hard to see. They keep them in the Undercroft, below the Gatehouse, near the water, near where Stone Eater sleeps. Defenses? Guards? Magical wards? Guards on the walls. Maybe 4, 5. More inside. And they got— The orc struggled for words, gesturing vaguely. "Singing stones. Little stones that scream if you get close without the right smell, and iron things that catch feet, and—" The orc's words cut off abruptly, not because it stopped talking, but because it stopped breathing. The wound in its leg, which had been bleeding steadily, had finally drained enough that shock and blood loss caught up with it. The yellow eyes went glassy, fixed on nothing, and the body went slack. "Convenient timing," Aragorn observed without much sympathy. "Right before it could tell us about whatever other surprises they have waiting." "We got enough," Gandalf said, straightening. "Confirmation of prisoners. which means we can't simply collapse the whole structure or burn them out. We need surgical intervention, not wholesale destruction, and confirmation of the creature, this stone eater, which means we're fighting on multiple fronts. Cultists, their defenses, and something ancient and territorial that they've deliberately agitated. The orc mentioned a crowned one, Stella added. That's their vessel, the person they're transforming into a singer-carrier. If we can disrupt that connection, break the crowning, the entire ritual should collapse. Assuming we can reach them before the ritual completes, Aragorn pointed out. The orc said they've been doing night singing. If they're working the ritual in stages, we might already be too late to prevent it, only able to interrupt. Then we move now, Gandalf decided. We can't afford to wait for perfect information or ideal conditions. Alfharin, can you scout ahead to the Gatehouse approach without being detected? The wolf's posture suggested skepticism. He could be stealthy, certainly, but if the cultists had the singing stones the orc mentioned, any approach might trigger alarms, but he gave a slight nod of agreement. He'd try. Before Alfharin could move, however, Aragorn stopped him with a gesture. Wait, we need to do something about this first. He indicated the orc bodies. If anyone from the bridge is watching, and they might be, they'll notice if their scouts don't return, or if there's obvious signs of combat here. You want to stage it? Gandalf asked. Make it look like the orcs attacked each other, got into a fight over loot or territory. It won't fool close inspection, but from a distance it might buy us time before they realize we're here. It was grim work, arranging corpses to suggest inter-orc violence rather than outside intervention, but necessary. Stella watched with barely concealed discomfort while Aragorn efficiently created a scene of apparent internal conflict, complete with planted evidence. A scattered handful of coins that might have been disputed loot, weapons positioned to suggest close quarters fighting among the dead orcs themselves. It won't hold up if they investigate seriously, Aragorn admitted when finished. But cultists aren't generally military tacticians. They might accept the obvious explanation rather than looking deeper. Good enough, Gandalf agreed. Now we move, and we move quietly. The approach from here to the Gatehouse offers limited cover, but there's broken ground and those ruined toll structures. We use them, advance in stages, observe before committing. And if we're spotted before we're ready, we adapt, Aragorn finished. Like we always do. They moved out, leaving the stage scene behind, advancing toward the Gatehouse with weapons ready and senses alert. The Black River flowed somewhere to their left, invisible behind banks of reeds and scrub, but its presence was palpable, a wrongness in the air, a corruption that made the skin crawl, and beneath it all, in stone and darkness and wet depths, something ancient waited, not sleeping anymore, not quite awake, but aware and hungry and patient. The Stone Eater, the troll beneath the bridge, whatever name it bore, it was there, and they would have to face it. But first, they had cultists to deal with, prisoners to free, and a ritual to disrupt. One crisis at a time. The final approach to the bridge took them another hour of painstaking advance through terrain that seemed designed by malicious intent to be as difficult as possible. The old military road had degraded into little more than a suggestion, with standing water filling every depression and thorny scrub growing so thick in places that progress required either lengthy detours or painful forcing through vegetation that tore at clothes and exposed skin. Alfharin led the way, his instincts for safe passage proving more reliable than human judgment. Twice he stopped the group just before they would have stepped into ground that looked solid, but was actually thin crust over deep mud. Once he detected a concealed pit, probably a trap set by the orcs or cultists. and guided them around it with a wide berth. By the time they reached a position where the bridge itself became fully visible, the sun had climbed to late morning, burning off some of the mist, but leaving the air heavy and humid. The black water below the bridge seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, creating an effect where the river appeared as a void, a gap in reality rather than a natural feature. "Stop here," Aragorn whispered, dropping into a crouch behind a tumbled section of ancient wall. The others followed suit, using the limited cover to observe while remaining concealed. The bridge stretched before them, and from this angle its true scale became apparent. The structure was massive, easily 60 feet wide at its base, rising in a gradual arch to perhaps 40 feet above the water at its apex. The stonework was extraordinary even in its weathered state, each block fitted with such precision that no mortar lines were visible from this distance. And despite centuries of neglect, the overall structure remained sound. The collapsed northern span was clearly the result of deliberate destruction rather than natural decay. Someone had brought down those stones with considerable force and skill, but it was the acoustic properties that struck Gandalf most immediately. As they watched and listened, a bird flew across the bridge, a crow, probably attracted by the possibility of carrion or scraps, and its cawing cry seemed to simply stop, not fade with distance as it should, but cease abruptly the moment the bird crossed onto the bridge's surface, as if the sound had been swallowed by the stone itself. "Did you hear that?" Stella whispered. "Or rather, did you not hear it?" "The bridge absorbs sound," Gandalf confirmed, studying the structure with renewed interest. "Not completely. We can still hear some ambient noise, but it dampens dramatically. Footsteps, voices, impacts, they'd all be muffled, reduced to near silence." "That's not natural weathering," Aragorn observed. "That's enchantment. Deliberate magical modification of the structure's properties. Makes it excellent for ambush," Gandalf continued. "You wouldn't hear attackers approaching. Couldn't call for help effectively. Even the sounds of combat would be suppressed, preventing anyone nearby from knowing there was trouble." "But it works both ways," Stella pointed out. "The cultists on the bridge wouldn't hear us approaching either, assuming we could get onto the structure undetected." "Assuming," Aragorn emphasized, "which is a significant assumption given we know they have guards and magical alarms." Gandalf moved forward slightly, risking a better view, and what he saw made him draw in a sharp breath. The bridge's surface was covered in carvings, not decorative reliefs, but script, dense lines of text in the old tongue running along both sides of the roadway. From this distance he couldn't read individual words, but the overall pattern was recognizable. Blessings and wards, protections meant to sanctify the crossing and ensure safe passage. But someone had modified them. Fresh tool marks were visible even from here, and the pattern of alterations was deliberately perverse. Key words changed or removed, power flows redirected, the protective intent inverted into something darker. "They've corrupted the wards," he said quietly, anger creeping into his voice despite his attempt at detachment. "The original enchantments were meant to protect travelers, to sanctify this crossing as a place of peace and safe passage. The cult has rewritten them. Now instead of protecting, they contain. Instead of blessing passage, they trap and bind." "Can you reverse it?" Stella asked. "Restore the original function?" "Possibly, but it would take time I'm not sure we have. And attempting it would almost certainly alert anyone monitoring the wards. Better to work around them than try to break them directly." Alfharin had been watching the bridge intently, and now he drew attention to something with a low whine and a gesture of his muzzle. Following his indication, Gandalf saw what the wolf had noticed: movement on the bridge's surface. Near where the intact span met the ruins of the gatehouse, a figure emerged, cultist by the robes, though at this distance details were difficult to make out. The figure walked along the bridge's edge, moving slowly, deliberately, occasionally stopping to adjust something at waist height. After a moment, Gandalf realized what they were doing, checking tripwires or similar mechanical traps, maintaining the physical security measures that complemented the magical wards. Professional, Aragorn muttered approvingly despite himself. They're not relying solely on magic, layered defenses, magical detection, backed by physical barriers and regular patrols. Someone with military experience is directing this operation, or someone who's learned from past failures, Stella suggested. The cult has been trying to break seals for months now. They've faced opposition, had operations disrupted. They've adapted, become more careful, more thorough. As they watched, the patrolling cultists completed their circuit and disappeared back into the gatehouse ruins. But in the brief time they'd been visible, Gandalf had noted several important details. The cultist moved stiffly, suggesting either injury or exhaustion. They'd checked the traps but hadn't reset any, implying the mechanisms were already armed, and most tellingly, they'd glanced frequently toward the water below the bridge with obvious nervousness. They're afraid of what's down there, Gandalf said. Their own guard is frightened of the Stone Eater, which means it's not fully under their control, not truly tamed. They've agitated it, made it territorial, but they can't reliably direct it. That's both dangerous and potentially useful. How is that useful? Stella asked. Because if we can provoke it at the right moment, in the right way, it might attack them as readily as it would attack us. Creatures like that, ancient, territorial, irritated, don't typically distinguish friend from foe. They simply destroy what's in their space. That's a risky strategy, Aragorn pointed out, especially since we'll also be in its space when it decides to start destroying things. I didn't say it was a good strategy, just a potentially useful one if all else fails. They continued observing for another 20 minutes, noting patterns. Guards changed positions roughly every half hour. There were at least 4 visible at any given time, probably more inside. Smoke continued to rise from somewhere within the gatehouse complex, suggesting ongoing ritual work. And periodically, very faintly even at this distance, they could hear chanting, rhythmic, repetitive, the kind of sustained vocalization that built power slowly over hours. The ritual is active, Stella confirmed, her face tight with memory and recognition. That's the preparatory phase of the crowning ceremony. They're conditioning the vessel, preparing the substitutes, building the resonance field. If we don't interrupt soon, within the next few hours, the binding will complete and we'll have a functional singer-carrier who can wield the key song. Then we need a plan, Gandalf said, and we need it now. Aragorn, what do you see in terms of tactical approach? The ranger studied the terrain with the practiced eye of someone who'd planned and executed more ambushes, rescues, and assaults than he cared to count. 3 possible approaches, he said after a moment. First, direct assault across the bridge, fast, straightforward, but we'd be completely exposed with no cover, and they'd see us coming from 100 yards away. We'd be fighting through their prepared defenses on ground of their choosing. Suicide. Agreed. Next. Second, try to circle around, approach the gatehouse from the sides or rear. Problem is the terrain. Marsh on both flanks makes wide movement difficult, and we don't know if they have guards posted on other approaches. We could spend hours trying to flank and discover they've covered those angles too. And the third option? Go under, Aragorn said, gesturing toward the water. The orc mentioned an Undercroft, chambers below the gatehouse near where the Stone Eater lairs. If there's an Undercroft, there must be access from below, probably from the water or near water level. We could potentially approach via the riverbank, find a way in beneath their main defenses, reach the prisoners directly. Also reach the Stone Eater directly, Stella pointed out. Yes, that's the significant downside. We'd be entering its territory in confined spaces with limited retreat options, but we'd also bypass most of the cult's prepared defenses, which are clearly focused on approaches across the bridge or overland, Gandalf considered, weighing risks against potential gains. Finally, the Undercroft approach. It's dangerous, but so are the alternatives, and this at least gives us a chance to free the prisoners before engaging the main cult force. Alfharin, can you scout the water line? Find us an approach route that doesn't require swimming through that corrupted water? The wolf gave a short, affirmative bark and loped off, staying low, using every scrap of cover. He disappeared into the reeds along the riverbank, moving with the fluid silence that always impressed Gandalf, despite years of familiarity. While they waited for Alfharin's return, Aragorn methodically checked his weapons and gear, sword loose in sheath, knife accessible, bow strung with string waxed against the humidity. Stella watched him work with obvious nervousness. "I'm going to be useless down there, aren't I?" she said quietly. "In close combat, in the dark, against whatever we find." "You'll be fine," Aragorn replied, without looking up from his preparations. "You're not a warrior, true, but you know what we're facing, the ritual structure, the cult's methods, how to disrupt their working. That knowledge is a weapon in its own right. When we reach the ritual site, you'll know what to target, what to break, what words to speak to collapse their ceremony. Gandalf and I can handle the violence. You handle the magic. I'm not a mage either, just a failed cultist with some theoretical knowledge." "You're a survivor," Gandalf corrected gently. "You left the cult when staying would have been easier. You've traveled with us through danger, kept pace, contributed. Don't diminish yourself. You're here because you're capable, not because we're charitable." Stella managed a weak smile. "Thank you, I think. Though I reserve the right to panic if we meet the Stone Eater face to face." "If we meet it face to face, we'll all be panicking," Aragorn assured her. "The trick is to panic productively, to keep moving, keep thinking, keep fighting even when terrified. Fear isn't weakness. Freezing is weakness. As long as you keep moving, you're winning." Alfharin returned after perhaps 15 minutes, wet to the shoulder and covered in river mud, but clearly satisfied with his findings. Through their bond, Gandalf interpreted the wolf's report. There was a way forward along the bank, difficult but passable. The water never rose above chest height for humans if they stayed to the stones. And critically, there was an opening, a drainage arch or old water gate, at the base of the Gatehouse foundation, currently above the waterline, but accessible. "He found us a way in," Gandalf reported. "It won't be comfortable, but it's viable. We should move now, while the guards are focused on the bridge approaches and not expecting infiltration from below." They gathered their gear, secured anything that might rattle or splash, and prepared for difficult progress through mud and water. Aragorn wrapped his bow in oiled cloth to protect it from moisture. Gandalf checked that his pipe and tobacco were safely waterproofed, not essential for survival, but important for maintaining morale in what promised to be a thoroughly unpleasant infiltration. "Stay close," Aragorn instructed as they prepared to move. "Single file, watch your footing, and for the love of all that's holy, be quiet. We're entering the Stone Eater's territory. It may be sleeping, it may be waiting, but either way, we don't want to announce our presence." They descended toward the riverbank, following Alpharin's path through reeds that grew taller than a man and thick enough to disorient. The ground beneath their feet transitioned from solid to spongy to outright liquid, requiring careful steps and constant attention to balance. The black water loomed ahead, and as they drew close enough to see its surface clearly, Gandalf's unease deepened. It wasn't just dark, it was wrong. The water moved sluggishly, with an oily thickness that natural water shouldn't have, and when light touched it, filtered sun through the reeds, instead of reflecting or refracting normally, the water seemed to drink the light, pull it down into depths that looked far deeper than the riverbed should allow. "Don't drink it," Gandalf warned unnecessarily. "Don't even let it touch open wounds if you can avoid it. That water has been corrupted, deliberately tainted with something alchemical or worse. I don't know what effect it would have, but I guarantee it wouldn't be healthy." They waded in, and the cold was immediate and shocking. Not the clean cold of mountain snowmelt, but a clammy, clinging cold that seemed to seep into bones and refuse to leave. The water rose to their knees, then their thighs, then waist height as promised, and every step required effort as the riverbed tried to suck at their boots. Alfharin swam ahead, his wolves paddling efficient and strong, leading them along a submerged stone causeway that kept them in the shallowest channel. Without his guidance, they would have stepped off into deeper water within the first dozen yards. The bridge loomed above them now, massive from this angle, its underside showing construction details invisible from above, carved supports, drainage channels, and those same corrupted runes that covered the top surface. And beneath the bridge, in the shadow where direct light never reached, the water took on an even darker quality, not just black, but somehow hungry, as if it waited for something to fall, to slip, to drown. From somewhere in that darkness came a sound, stone scraping on stone, slow and deliberate, like a mountain clearing its throat. The Stone Eater was awake, and it knew they were there. The drainage arch that Alfharin had found was partially concealed by hanging vegetation and centuries of mineral buildup, but once they knew where to look, the opening was obvious enough. A semicircular void perhaps 5 feet high at its apex, cutting into the foundation of the gatehouse. Water trickled from it sluggishly, adding its small contribution to the corrupted river. They gathered at the arch's mouth, still waist-deep in the cold black water, listening intently for any sign that their approach had been noticed. The sound they'd heard, stone on stone, the Stone Eater's movement, had not repeated, but the silence that followed was somehow worse than noise. It was the silence of something large, holding very still, listening as intently as they were. "Inside quickly," Gandalf whispered, gesturing Aragorn forward. "The longer we stay in the open water, the more vulnerable we are." Aragorn moved first, sword drawn despite the awkward confines, stepping carefully into the drainage tunnel. The footing inside was treacherous, slick stone covered in algae and slime, with ankle-deep water flowing past. He advanced cautiously, testing each step, using his free hand against the curved wall for balance. Stella followed, then Gandalf, with Alfharin bringing up the rear. The wolf moved with visible reluctance, every instinct telling him that entering a confined space in a predator's territory was foolish, but his loyalty to Gandalf overrode survival sense. The tunnel extended perhaps 20 feet before opening into a larger space. As they emerged, the darkness was absolute for a moment, until Gandalf risked a dim light from his staff, just enough to see by, not enough to be visible from outside if anyone happened to be looking down toward the water. They were in what had once been a storage chamber or cistern, a vaulted space roughly 30 feet across with walls of fitted stone and a floor that had once been level but now sloped toward accumulated water and debris. Ancient barrels, long since rotted to staves and hoops, lay scattered along with rusted iron fittings and broken pottery. A stairwell cut into the far wall led upward into darkness, but what drew immediate attention were the cages. 3 of them, crude constructions of wood and rope positioned against the near wall, where moisture from the drainage would have made the prisoners as uncomfortable as possible. 2 cages held figures, people slumped and motionless in ways that suggested either unconsciousness or despair, so complete that movement seemed pointless. Aragorn was across the chamber instantly, kneeling beside the nearest cage, checking the occupants. "Alive," he reported quietly, "but barely. This one's breathing is shallow and they're cold, dangerously cold. How long have they been down here?" "At least a day, probably more," Stella said, moving to examine the second occupied cage. Her face was pale with controlled horror as she recognized the signs of what had been done. "Look at their throats. See the bruising? They've been forced to chant, probably for hours. And their wrists, those marks are from being held in position, forced to maintain specific poses while vocalizing. This is systematic preparation for the crowning ritual." The prisoners, Gandalf could see now that there were 3 in total, 2 in one cage and 1 alone in the other, were in terrible condition. Their clothing was soaked and filthy, their exposed skin showing signs of prolonged cold exposure. And when Aragorn gently tried to rouse the nearest one, the response was weak and confused. "Water," the man, young, perhaps 20, mumbled through cracked lips. "Please, clean water." "Here," Aragorn said, offering his water skin. Slowly, small sips, the young man drank with desperate gratitude, then seemed to focus properly for the first time. "You're not them, not the singers. Are you rescue?" "Yes," Gandalf said, moving closer. "We're here to stop the ritual and free you. But we need to move quickly and quietly. Can you walk?" "I think so. My legs are numb, but I can try. The others—" He gestured to his cage mate, an older woman who hadn't stirred. "She's worse. They made her sing longer, louder. Something happened to her voice, to her throat. She hasn't spoken since yesterday." Aragorn was already working on the cage latch, a simple mechanism, really just rope and wood, designed to contain people too weak to resist rather than determined escapees. It came apart quickly under his knife, and he helped the young man out, supporting him when his legs nearly gave way. "Stella, check the woman," Gandalf ordered while moving to the 3rd cage. "See if she can travel." The prisoner in the 3rd cage was a girl, 14 or 15, and she was conscious and alert, though her eyes held a glassiness that suggested trauma or shock. When Gandalf approached, she shrank back against the far corner of her cage. "Easy," he said gently, making himself as non-threatening as possible despite the staff and the strange light. "We're not with the cult. We're here to help. Can you tell me your name?" "Mira," she whispered. "They took me from the village 3 days ago. Said I had the right resonance, whatever that means. They made me sing words I didn't understand, and every time I did, I felt something leaving, like they were taking pieces of me." "No more," Gandalf assured her, working on her cage's binding. "That's over, you're free now. Can you walk?" "Yes, I'm cold and hungry and scared, but I can walk. Better than Marta." She gestured to the unconscious woman Stella was examining. She tried to resist them, refused to sing, so they hurt her, made her sing anyway. She hasn't been right since. Stella had checked the woman's vital signs and was looking grim. "She needs a healer, real medical care, not just first aid. Her throat is damaged, I can see bruising that goes deep, and she's hypothermic and dehydrated. Moving her risks making things worse but leaving her here." "We take her," Gandalf decided. "We didn't come this far to leave anyone behind. Aragorn, can you carry her?" "If we're not fighting, yes. If combat starts, I'll have to put her down and she becomes vulnerable. But we'll manage. A sound from above, footsteps on stone, muffled by the bridge's sound-dampening effect, but still audible this deep in the structure, made them all freeze. Someone was moving in the chambers directly overhead, and voices drifted down, indistinct but clearly ritual chanting. "They're close," Stella breathed. "The main ritual chamber must be just above us." "Which means we're in the right place," Gandalf said. "But also means we need to be extremely careful. Alfharin, watch the stairwell. Warn us if anyone starts coming down." The wolf positioned himself at the base of the stairs, every sense focused upward, ready to alert at the first sign of descent. Aragorn carefully lifted the unconscious woman, Marta, into a carrying position that would allow him to move relatively freely while still supporting her weight. She was light, dangerously so, suggesting days of deprivation. The young man, he'd given his name as Thomas, was supporting himself with one hand on the wall, recovering strength slowly. Mira stood close to Stella, clearly viewing the former cultist as the safest person to stay near. "We need to make a decision," Aragorn said quietly. "Do we try to extract these three now, get them to safety before engaging the cult? Or do we take them with us and try to disrupt the ritual while protecting three civilians who can barely walk?" It was a genuine tactical dilemma with no good answer. Extract them first, and the ritual might complete while they were gone. Take them along, and they became liabilities in combat, potential hostages, casualties, or simply obstacles in confined spaces. Gandalf was about to answer when Thomas spoke up, his voice stronger now that he'd had water and a few minutes to recover. "There are more," he said. "More prisoners. I heard them, heard the guards talking. They brought at least 8 of us. 3 here, but 5 more somewhere else in this place. If you leave now, if the ritual completes, those 5 will die. I know it. I felt what they were doing to us, felt how close to death it pushed us. The others won't survive if they're used for the final stage." "Where?" Gandalf asked urgently. "Where are the other 5? "I don't know exactly, but higher up, I think. The guards mentioned keeping the prime resonators closer to the singing chamber. We were just secondary, practice subjects. The 5 above are the ones they really plan to use." That changed the calculation entirely. They couldn't extract and protect 8 prisoners, while also disrupting a ritual performed by a dozen or more cultists. The numbers simply didn't work. "New plan," Gandalf decided. "We hide these 3 somewhere defensible, somewhere they can wait safely while we deal with the cult. Then we disrupt the ritual, free the other prisoners, and extract everyone together." "Hide us where?" Mira asked, looking around the dank, exposed chamber. "There's nowhere here that's safe." She was right. The Undercroft offered no real concealment, no secure spaces where non-combatants could shelter. "The drainage tunnel," Stella suggested. "It's not comfortable, but it's out of sight from the interior. If we position them in the tunnel, back them into it far enough that they're not visible from the chamber entrance, they should be safe unless someone specifically comes looking." "And if someone does come looking?" Thomas asked. "Then you stay very quiet and very still, and hope they don't search thoroughly," Aragorn said bluntly. "It's not a perfect solution. None of our options are perfect. But it gives you better odds than staying in the open or trying to fight your way out alongside us." The 3 prisoners exchanged glances, then Thomas nodded. "We'll do it. Better than staying in those cages." They moved quickly, guiding the 3 prisoners back into the drainage tunnel, positioning them in the darkest section where the curve of the arch would hide them from casual observation. Aragorn left them his backup water skin and what little food they had that wouldn't spoil in the damp. It wasn't much, some dried meat, hard bread, but better than nothing. Stay here until we come back for you, Gandalf instructed. No matter what you hear, fighting, shouting, whatever, you stay hidden. We will return. I promise you that. And if you don't? Mira asked, the practical question that everyone was thinking. If we don't return within 2 hours, Aragorn said, checking the angle of light from outside to estimate time, wait until full dark, then make your way down the river. Stay in the shallows, move quietly, and get as far from this place as you can. Head south toward the village of Milford. It's about 10 miles downstream. Tell them what happened here. Tell them to send word to the rangers. With the prisoners secured as well as circumstances allowed, the 4 of them, Gandalf, Aragorn, Stella, and Alfharin, turned their attention to the stairwell leading upward into the gatehouse proper. This is where it gets dangerous, Gandalf said quietly. From here on, assume every step is observed, every sound is heard, every moment could bring discovery. We move silent and fast. Stella, you guide us. You know ritual structures. Where would they position the main ceremony? Highest accessible point with good acoustics, she replied. They need vertical space for the sound to resonate properly, and they need proximity to the sky for celestial alignment. If this gatehouse still has any of its upper floors intact, that's where they'll be. Then up we go, Gandalf said, staff held ready. Into the singing chamber, into the ritual's heart. Stay close, stay alert, and remember, we're here to disrupt, not to win glorious combat. Break their ceremony, free the prisoners, and get out. Anything else is optional. They ascended into darkness, each step taking them closer to the ritual that even now worked its perverse magic, binding innocent voices to corrupt purpose, preparing to crown a false singer-carrier with stolen power. Above them, the chanting grew louder. Below them, in cold black water and ancient stone, the Stone Eater stirred, and the outcome remained desperately uncertain. The stairwell was narrow and steep, clearly designed for function rather than comfort. A servant's passage or maintenance access rather than any formal route through the gatehouse. The stone walls pressed close on both sides, and the ceiling was low enough that Gandalf had to tilt his staff at an angle to avoid scraping it against the overhead blocks. He kept his light minimal, just enough to avoid stepping on something that would clatter and betray them. The chanting from above had settled into a steady, hypnotic rhythm that Gandalf recognized from the seal sites they'd investigated before. The kind of sustained vocalization that built power slowly, like water filling a vessel drop by drop. Alfharin moved directly ahead of Gandalf now, the wolf's body low and tense, paws placed with deliberate silence. Every few steps he would pause, ears rotating, sampling the air ahead before committing to further advance. It was the wolf's hunting behavior, translated into infiltration, the same patience and precision, just applied to a different kind of prey. The stairwell opened onto a landing where 3 passages diverged. The chanting was clearly loudest from the right-hand passage. The left led toward what sounded like moving air, possibly an exterior opening. The center passage descended again, deeper into the gatehouse foundation. Right toward the ritual, Aragorn murmured, barely audible. Left probably connects to the bridge surface. Center goes down toward the Undercroft proper. We go right eventually, Gandalf confirmed. But first we go center. The orc said the Undercroft amplifies the chanting through stone resonance. If we can understand how they've set that up, we can potentially disrupt it from below, rather than confronting them directly above. Aragorn's expression suggested he found this approach frustratingly indirect, but he accepted the logic with a slight nod. Center it is. The descending passage was worse than the stairwell. Older, rougher, showing construction techniques that predated the gatehouse itself. This was original fortress foundation, built when the structure had been part of something larger, more significant than a mere bridge crossing. The stones were enormous, each block the size of a small wagon, fitted without mortar through sheer engineering precision. The air changed as they descended, becoming colder, damper, carrying that distinctive mineral rot smell they'd noticed outside, and something else, a vibration, not sound exactly, more like pressure on the eardrums, a subsonic pulse that Gandalf felt in his chest and sinuses rather than hearing with his ears. "Stone resonance," Stella breathed, her voice barely above a whisper. "They've already activated the Undercroft's natural acoustic properties. The chanting above is propagating through the stone structure, amplifying as it goes. By the time it reaches the ritual site, it will be 3 or 4 times more powerful than the raw vocal output." "Can you feel it?" Gandalf asked her. "Can't you?" He could. It was subtle but unmistakable. A pressure that wasn't physical, a sensation that wasn't quite hearing. The cult's chanting was doing exactly what Stella had described, using the ancient stonework as a resonance chamber, multiplying its power through the building's own structure. The passage leveled out into a low-ceilinged chamber that Gandalf estimated was directly beneath the bridge's central arch. The floor was partially flooded, black water standing perhaps 4 inches deep across most of the space, and from cracks in the walls, thin streams of the same corrupted water trickled in constantly, feeding the pool. At the chamber's center, someone had recently installed equipment, 3 iron stands arranged in a triangle, each holding a ceramic vessel filled with something that glowed faintly, pale blue, cold, like bioluminescent deep-sea creatures. Connected between the stands were lengths of copper wire, old and green with verdigris but clearly functional, arranged in geometric patterns that Gandalf recognized immediately. "A resonance amplifier," he said, forgetting caution for a moment in his surprise. "A physical one, using copper conductivity and these vessels as focusing points. This isn't just exploiting natural acoustics. They've installed deliberate enhancement equipment. The vessels are bone and iron wind chimes," Stella said, stepping closer carefully. They've been modified, converted from alarm systems into power amplifiers. Someone with serious technical knowledge of cult magic did this. This isn't improvised." Alfharin suddenly stiffened, a low growl building in his chest before he visibly suppressed it. He was looking at a section of wall to their left where the stone was darker, wetter, where a natural crack had widened into something approaching a passage. Too large for a person, but adequate for something that could compress and squeeze through ancient rock. Gandalf followed the wolf's gaze and felt the hairs on his arms rise beneath his robes. Through that crack, in absolute darkness beyond the reach of his minimal staff light, something breathed. Not the rhythmic breathing of sleep. This was slow, controlled, deliberate. The breathing of something awake and aware that was choosing for its own reasons to remain motionless, watching, waiting. "Don't look directly at it," Gandalf murmured, fighting every instinct that screamed to confront the unknown threat. "Don't react aggressively. We are not prey. We are not threats. We are simply passing through. Move naturally." "There is nothing natural about this situation," Aragorn replied through barely moving lips, but he followed Gandalf's instruction, keeping his body language deliberately non-threatening while his hand remained on his sword hilt. Stella was doing her best, which meant she was staring at the floor and moving slightly too quickly, but at least she wasn't making sudden movements or sounds. Alfharin, with the complex instincts of both predator and companion animal, managed the most convincing performance, acknowledging the presence with a brief, direct gaze, and then deliberately looking away, the wolf language signal for, "I see you, but I am not challenging you." The breathing paused for 3 heartbeats, then continued, unchanged in rhythm, and the vast shape in the darkness shifted almost imperceptibly, not withdrawing, not advancing, just adjusting its position the way a person might shift their weight while waiting. It had acknowledged them and chosen for now to watch rather than act. "Move," Gandalf said quietly. "Steady pace, no running." They crossed the flooded chamber with the careful deliberateness of people trying not to startle something that could kill them effortlessly. Each step through the standing water seemed thunderously loud despite the stone's sound-dampening properties. Each breath seemed too harsh, too obvious. On the far side, where another passage led upward through the foundation, Gandalf paused to examine the resonance amplifier more closely. The copper arrangements were sophisticated. The placement of the ceramic vessels calculated to exploit specific acoustic nodes in the chamber's geometry. Destroying it would significantly reduce the ritual's power, but the sound of destruction would immediately alert both the cultists above and the Stone Eater behind them. "Can you disrupt it silently?" he asked Stella. She studied the installation, lips moving slightly as she worked through the technical details. "If I adjust the copper geometry, just move 2 sections out of alignment, it won't destroy the system, but it will introduce interference. The amplification will become distortion. Instead of enhancing the chanting, it will create harmonic discord." "Harmonic discord," Gandalf repeated, seeing the implications, "which will propagate up through the stone structure, just as the original resonance did. The cultists above will feel it. Their chanting will become dissonant, harder to maintain. And the Stone Eater," Stella added with a look back toward the dark crack, "will feel it too. These vibrations have been keeping it agitated, feeding its territorial instinct. Introduce discord and the effect becomes unpredictable. It might calm down, or it might become more erratic." "Calculated risk," Aragorn said. "Same as everything else tonight." "Do it," Gandalf decided, carefully and quietly. Stella waded back to the installation, her hands moving with practiced precision despite the circumstances. She was, Gandalf reflected, remarkably composed for someone with minimal field experience. Whatever she'd been in the cult, she'd been technically competent, and that competence was serving them well now that it was pointed in a better direction. 2 copper sections, repositioned with the delicacy of a jeweler adjusting precious settings. A slight rotation of 1 ceramic vessel, changing its acoustic angle by perhaps 15 degrees. The pale blue glow in the vessels flickered. Above them, clearly audible despite the stone dampening, the rhythmic chanting stumbled. 2 voices losing their place. A beat of silence, then resumption that was subtly off from the original pattern. "It's working," Stella breathed. From behind them, from the dark crack in the wall, the Stone Eater's breathing changed, becoming slightly faster, slightly more irregular. Not yet alarmed, not yet moving, but responding to the altered vibration in ways that suggested the instinctive, territorial agitation it had been maintaining was now complicated by something unexpected. "We need to move now," Aragorn said, "before it decides to investigate the change." They moved to the upward passage, ascending quickly now that subtlety had been partially sacrificed for disruption. Behind them, the sound of stone shifting, great masses of rock adjusting with geological patience, told them the Stone Eater was moving. Not chasing, not yet, but awake. Fully awake now in a way it hadn't been before. Alfharin pressed close to Gandalf's side as they climbed, the wolf's warmth a comfort against the cold that had settled into Gandalf's bones from the corrupted water. Through their bond, The wolf communicated something that Gandalf interpreted as both warning and readiness, the acknowledgement that something large and dangerous was behind them, combined with the absolute commitment to face whatever came next together. "Good wolf," Gandalf murmured. "Good, brave wolf." The passage above opened onto the landing where they'd made their first decision. From here, the right-hand passage toward the ritual was now not a choice, but a necessity. They could hear the chanting clearly, disrupted, slightly discordant, but ongoing. The cultists were adapting, compensating for the interference they'd introduced. They were running out of time, but behind them, in the flooded Undercroft with its corrupted water and modified amplifiers, something enormous pulled itself free of the crack in the ancient stone and stood to its full height for the first time in years. The bridge troll was fully awake, and it was displeased. They heard it before they saw it, a sound like a millstone grinding, slow, deliberate, massive, that propagated through the stone walls around them as much as through the air. Then a crack like splitting granite, followed by the deep percussion of something enormous shifting its weight from one foot to another for the first time in what might have been decades. "It's standing," Aragorn said quietly, and the flatness in his voice conveyed exactly how seriously he was taking that information. "Something that size, it's been crouched or lying for years. It needs to find its balance." "That buys us perhaps a minute," Gandalf said. "Maybe two. Move." They went right into the passage toward the ritual, moving quickly now that quiet was becoming secondary to speed. The passage here showed recent modification. The cult had cleared debris, reinforced a section of collapsed ceiling with fresh timber, and installed crude torches in iron brackets that illuminated the route with jumping, reddish light. "They use this passage regularly," Stella noted as they moved. "This isn't emergency access. This is their main internal route. Guards use it for patrols." "Which means we might meet guards coming the other way," Aragorn said, shifting position to take point more aggressively, sword now fully drawn. The passage curved, descended slightly, then opened into a space that made Gandalf stop and reassess everything. The cavern was natural, a genuine geological formation that the original fortress builders had incorporated into their design, rather than attempting to remove or bypass. Roughly oval, perhaps 60 feet at its widest point, with a ceiling that soared to 40 feet at the apex, where cracks admitted thin threads of daylight from the bridge surface above. The floor was uneven, dropping in several places to pools of black water, and massive stalactites descended from the ceiling, some reaching almost to the floor to create natural columns. And at the cavern's far end, half submerged in a pool where the natural water table met the corrupted river, was the bridge troll. Even having known it was there, even having heard it wake and move, the reality was shocking. It was vast, 8 feet tall at minimum when standing, though right now it was still hunched, still in the process of pulling itself fully upright from a position of years-long repose. Its body was the color of wet limestone, mottled with darker patches that might have been algae or might simply have been the natural variation of stone flesh. Its skin, if skin was even the right word, had the texture of roughly dressed granite, slightly crystalline in places where mineral deposits had formed, smoother in the joints that needed to flex and move. Its face was the most unsettling aspect. Not monstrous in any conventional sense, no tusks, no distorted features, but deeply, fundamentally wrong in its proportions. Eyes set too far apart and too deep beneath a brow ridge that jutted out like a ledge. A nose that was more suggestion than feature. 2 vertical slits above a mouth that was simply a horizontal line across the lower face, currently closed. And those eyes, pale gray, almost colorless, with pupils that contracted sharply against even the minimal light of Gandalf's staff, moved with an intelligence that was neither human nor entirely animal, ancient, patient, territorial. Surrounding the troll in the near portion of the cavern, 4 cultists worked with the determined focus of people who knew exactly how dangerous their situation was and had chosen to be here anyway. 2 were chanting, maintaining the sustained vocalization that kept the troll agitated and focused outward rather than inward. 1 was throwing large chunks of raw meat into the pool near the troll's feet, maintaining the feeding relationship that the cult had established to keep it compliant. The 4th cultist stood back from the others, watching the troll with the nervous attentiveness of a zookeeper who knows their animal could kill them with a thought. "Feeding it," Stella breathed. "They're using a combination of food reinforcement and sound conditioning to maintain behavioral control. The chanting keeps it irritated and territorial. The food keeps it associating that state with reward." "Can your disruption from below break that conditioning?" Gandalf asked. "The harmonic discord I introduced will be interfering with the acoustic conditioning right now. But breaking months of established behavioral reinforcement takes more than a few minutes of interference. Then we work with what we have." Below the troll's full attention, they might have slipped past along the cavern's far edge. There was a passage on the opposite side that clearly led upward toward the ritual chamber. The route would require careful movement through shadows, using the natural columns as cover, staying well clear of the pool and the cultists working near it. It was possible. Barely possible. But possible. Alfharin apparently reached the same tactical assessment, because the wolf pressed close against the cavern wall and began moving along it with absolute minimal profile, using every shadow, every column, demonstrating that a large silver-gray wolf could make itself remarkably invisible when sufficiently motivated. Gandalf extinguished his staff light entirely. Darkness, complete and disorienting but necessary. They moved in single file, one hand on the wall for orientation, the other extended to maintain contact with the person ahead. Gandalf felt Stella's shoulder under his hand, felt her careful, deliberate steps matching his own. Behind him, Aragorn moved with the soundless efficiency of decades of wilderness experience. The cultists didn't notice them. Their attention was entirely consumed by the troll, which was showing signs of behavioral disruption. The harmonic discord from below was reaching it, interfering with the acoustic conditioning, making its movements less predictable and more agitated than the cultists clearly expected. "Gently," one cultist murmured to another. "It's feeling the interference. Increase the lower harmonic." "I'm trying," the second cultist replied through clenched teeth. "Something's wrong with the resonance from the Undercroft. It's not responding correctly." They were perhaps 20 feet from the far passage when Alpharin's low growl, involuntary, immediately suppressed, but impossible to completely silence, escaped him. The troll's head came up. Those pale eyes swept the cavern with sudden, focused attention. Not the unfocused agitation of a conditioned animal responding to trained stimuli, but genuine predatory alertness. Something had triggered actual awareness rather than managed instinct. The troll rose to its full height, stone joints grinding audibly. The cavern shook with the impact of its weight redistributing. "It's seen us," Aragorn said, abandoning whispers since concealment was now irrelevant. "Run." They ran. Behind them, the troll moved, not the lumbering, predictable movement of simple creatures, but something more disturbing, deliberate, calculated motion that covered ground with terrible efficiency despite its apparent massiveness. Each step shook the floor. Each impact sent tremors through the stone that could be felt in the bones. The cultists scattered as the troll moved through their positions, sending their feeding meat flying, disrupting their chanting formation. One cultist shouted orders at the others, trying to reassert the acoustic conditioning, trying to redirect the troll's attention back to its trained purpose. But the harmonic discord Stella had introduced had done its work. The conditioning was fractured, the behavioral patterns disrupted. The troll was responding to its own instincts now rather than trained stimuli. Its instincts said, "Intruders in territory. Remove intruders." They reached the far passage just ahead of the troll's reaching hand, a massive stone-gray appendage that swept through the space where Aragorn had been standing half a second earlier, with force enough that the displaced air hit them like a gust of wind. Stone chips fell from the wall where the troll's knuckles connected instead. "Move!" Gandalf commanded, though no command was necessary. The passage was steep and narrow, the troll too large to follow for now. But narrow passages didn't stop determined trolls. They went through walls. A deafening impact behind them confirmed this immediately. The troll, denied access through the passage entrance, simply attacked the wall beside it. The whole structure shook. Dust fell from the ceiling in curtains. And from below, from the flooded Undercroft, from the corrupted water and ancient dark, the sound of the troll's movement echoed and re-echoed through the stone amplifier system in ways the cult had never intended, filling the fortress with a subsonic roar that shook loose masonry and set the copper resonance wires singing discordant harmonics. Above them, clearly audible even through the chaos, the ritual chanting broke apart entirely. Cultists shouting, running feet, the sound of ceremonial equipment being hastily secured or abandoned. The ritual had been disrupted, but the troll was awake, territorial, and fully committed to the idea that everything currently in its domain was an intruder to be destroyed, including them. "Up," Gandalf ordered, climbing. "Into the ritual chamber, into the mess we've created. Our only safety now is in complexity. The more chaos, the more the troll has to manage, the less focused it can be on any single target." "That's a terrible strategy," Aragorn said, climbing beside him. "Yes," Gandalf agreed, "but it's the one we have. Up. Now." Above them, the ritual chamber awaited. Below them, through stone and water and ancient dark, the bridge troll followed. The passage upward was a nightmare of loose stone and bad footing. Someone, probably the cult during their initial occupation, had installed crude wooden steps over the worst sections, but the troll's impact on the walls below had shaken several free, leaving gaps that had to be jumped or scrambled over in near darkness. Gandalf led with minimal staff light, just enough to see the next 3 feet of passage. Behind him, Stella moved with surprising agility, considering her lack of combat experience, driven by the very pure and uncomplicated motivation of not wanting to be caught by what was behind them. Aragorn brought up the rear, and Alfharin moved between Stella and Gandalf with the wolf's characteristic refusal to abandon anyone to face danger alone. Another impact below, closer this time, more violent. The troll wasn't just striking at walls now. It was methodically working through the foundation stone, following the vibration of their movement through the rock, the way a predator tracks prey through undergrowth. It couldn't follow them through the narrow passage, but it didn't need to. It was simply removing the passage. "It's breaking through the foundation," Aragorn reported from the rear, his voice carrying the clipped economy of someone conserving breath for climbing while simultaneously monitoring a threat. Not randomly, deliberately. It understands we're above it, and it's coming up through the stone. "Can it do that?" Stella asked. "It's half stone itself," Gandalf replied. "It moves through rock the way fish move through water, not quickly, but with complete competence. We need to be out of this passage before it breaks through. They climbed faster, abandoning caution in favor of speed, and emerged onto a landing that opened into a wider corridor showing clear signs of cult occupation, torches in brackets, fresh rope along one wall as a guideline, chalk marks on the floor indicating directions and warnings in cult script. Behind them, the passage they'd just climbed gave a tremendous shudder. Then another. Cracks appeared in the walls, spreading with horrible speed. A section of the floor simply dropped away, falling back down into the darkness below, and through the gap they could see pale gray movement, the troll ascending through the structure itself. "Left," Aragorn ordered, reading the cult's chalk markings with the quick competence of someone experienced at interpreting enemy signage. "Left leads toward the bridge surface. We need open space, somewhere the troll can't corner us against walls." They went left, running now, the corridor widening as they moved. Below and behind, the sounds of structural destruction continued. Great grinding impacts, the crack of stone, the deep percussion of something enormous moving with terrible purpose through ancient architecture. The corridor ended at a heavy wooden door that was, mercifully, not locked. The cult had clearly not anticipated their defenses being approached from this direction. Aragorn hit it at full stride, shoulder down, and it burst open onto the bridge surface itself. Cold air, open sky. The gray morning light felt almost shockingly bright after the darkness of the passages. The bridge stretched before them in both directions, south toward safety, north toward the collapsed span and the ruins where the ritual was being performed, or had been being performed before the chaos they'd introduced. "The ritual," Gandalf said immediately, turning north. "If we've disrupted the ceremony but not ended it, they'll be trying to complete it despite the chaos. We need to—" A section of the bridge surface exploded upward. Not a dramatic eruption, more like watching a trap door open, except the trap door was 6 feet of solid stone bridge deck, and the thing opening it was doing so from below with its bare hands. The troll emerged onto the bridge surface with the unhurried deliberateness of something that has never needed to hurry because nothing has ever successfully run from it. It stood to full height, nearly 9 feet now that they could see it clearly in proper light, and considerably more imposing than the cavern shadows had suggested. In daylight, its stone flesh showed extraordinary detail. The crystalline deposits along its shoulders, the algae growth in the deeper crevices of its skin, the places where actual small stones had become incorporated into its hide over decades of contact with the riverbed, its pale eyes fixed on them with absolute focus. Behind the troll, from the northern end of the bridge, cultists appeared, 6 or 7 of them, plus the chant leader, drawn by the noise of the troll's emergence. They stopped when they saw the troll, saw Gandalf's group, saw the situation, and clearly tried to determine which represented the greater immediate threat. "They're going to try to redirect it," Stella said urgently. "If their chant leader can reassert acoustic control, they'll point the troll at us rather than at themselves." "Then we keep moving," Gandalf decided. "Don't let them establish position. Aragorn—" "Already moving," the ranger confirmed. What followed was unlike any conventional battle. The bridge's sound-dampening properties created surreal quality. Impacts that should have been thunderous arrived muffled. Footsteps that should have echoed were absorbed. The visual violence of the troll's movements was accompanied by strangely inadequate sound, creating dissociation between what the eyes saw and what the ears reported. The troll swept its arm in a broad arc that would have taken all 4 of them off the bridge railing if they hadn't already scattered. Aragorn went right, diving flat and rolling to his feet with liquid grace. Stella went left, stumbling but keeping her feet, pressing against the parapet. Gandalf stepped backward with a measured pace, staff coming up in a defensive gesture that sent a burst of sharp light directly into the troll's eyes. The creature recoiled, not dramatically, but enough. The pale eyes were sensitive, adapted to underground darkness, and the sudden brightness was genuinely painful rather than merely startling. Alfharin, rather than retreating, charged directly toward the troll's legs. Not to attack. The wolf was experienced enough to know that biting stone flesh was ineffective and potentially damaging to his own teeth. Instead, Alfharin ran directly beneath the troll, through the narrow gap between its legs, then wheeled and barked twice, sharp, commanding sounds that drew the creature's attention downward and backward, disrupting its focus on the more dangerous humans. Stella nearly fell when a section of parapet crumbled. The troll's earlier emergence had weakened the bridge's structural integrity in ways that were making themselves felt across the entire span. She grabbed the remaining stonework, caught herself, but her foot slipped over the edge, and for one vertiginous moment she was looking down at the black water impossibly far below. Then Alfharin was there, impossibly fast for his size, his jaws closing on the strap of her pack, body braced against the parapet, pulling with every pound of his considerable weight. Stella scrambled back onto the bridge surface, gasping, and Alfharin held position until she was clearly stable. "Thank you," she managed, voice shaking. The wolf gave her a brief assessing look, then turned back to watch the troll. Gandalf, meanwhile, had been working. While the troll was distracted by Alfharin's flanking maneuver, he'd moved toward the cult's position, staff raised. He wasn't attacking. Not yet. He was assessing, reading the chant leader's intentions, trying to determine how close they were to reasserting control over the troll. Close. Too close. The chant leader was experienced, and despite the harmonic disruption from below, despite the chaos of the troll's uncontrolled emergence, they were finding the right harmonics again, feeling for the acoustic conditioning the troll had been subjected to and beginning to reassert it. "Stella," Gandalf called. "The chant leader, counter them. The disruption phrase from the Undercroft, can you reproduce it vocally?" "I can try," she called back, moving toward him despite every self-preservation instinct screaming at her to do otherwise. Behind them, the troll, oriented toward the chant leader's voice, a residual conditioned response, and took 3 massive steps in that direction. Cultists scattered, their formation breaking. The chant leader held position, impressive in their nerve, maintaining the acoustic pattern despite a 9-foot stone creature moving toward them. Aragorn was using the chaos productively. While all attention focused on the troll, he was working toward the northern end of the bridge, toward the ritual site, toward the bound prisoners the cult had positioned there. He moved low and fast, using the troll's bulk as cover, staying in the creature's blind spots with the practiced skill of someone who'd spent years evading predators with better senses than humans possessed. The troll swiped at the chant leader, not targeted aggression, just territorial irritation at something making noise in its space. The chant leader dove aside with impressive reflexes, rolled, came up still chanting though the pattern had broken again. Stella reached Gandalf's side and began vocalizing the disruption phrase. Imperfect, slightly wrong in pitch, but recognizable. It wasn't enough to break the chant leader's efforts alone, but combined with the ongoing interference from the Undercroft, it created sufficient discord that the troll's conditioned response kept dissolving before it could fully establish. The troll was confused now. Territorial aggression without clear target. Conditioned responses firing and misfiring, multiple sources of stimulus competing for its attention. It did what such creatures do when confused. It focused on what was closest and most immediate. It turned toward Gandalf. "Splendid," Gandalf said quietly, meeting those pale, ancient eyes without flinching. At least we know where we stand. The staff came up, light blazed, the troll charged, and somewhere to the north, on the bridge's ruined end, Aragorn reached the ritual site alone, found the bound prisoners, and began cutting ropes with the desperate efficiency of someone who knows they have very little time. The troll's charge covered 30 feet in less time than should have been physically possible for something that moved with such apparent deliberateness. Gandalf threw himself sideways, staff swinging in an arc that discharged a burst of force, not fire, not lightning, something more fundamental than either, directly into the troll's leading shoulder. The creature staggered. One massive foot came down on the bridge parapet instead of the roadway, and a section of ancient stonework simply ceased to exist, crumbling into the gorge below. The troll caught its balance with the instinctive competence of something that had navigated unstable terrain for centuries. Then it reoriented toward Gandalf. "Right," Gandalf said to Stella, who had pressed against the inner parapet, trying to be very small and very still. "Change of plan. Follow my lead exactly. Move when I move, stop when I stop. And keep singing that disruption phrase. Don't stop regardless of what happens." "What are you going to do?" she asked. "Something inadvisable," he admitted. "But there's a winch room. The ranger's scouting report mentioned one, above the cavern, with machinery for controlling water gates and portcullises. If we can reach it and I can work with the mechanisms, we have options." "Where is it?" "Approximately where the troll is currently standing." Stella stared at him. "You want to go toward it?" "I want to go past it," Gandalf corrected. "There's a difference. Alfharin." The wolf appeared instantly from wherever he'd been repositioning. The bridge's sound dampening meant Alfharin could move without being heard even at close range, a property that was serving him excellently as a tactical asset. Gandalf communicated through their bond, not in words but in images and intentions. The troll's position, the space they needed to cross, the timing required, Alfharin's role. The wolf absorbed it with the rapid comprehension that still, after years of partnership, impressed Gandalf deeply. Then Alfharin moved, not toward the troll, but around it, circling wide, getting into position. The troll tracked Gandalf, ignoring Alfharin. This was partly conditioned behavior. The cult had trained it to prioritize human targets, and partly because Alfharin was simply below its threshold of concern. A wolf was not, by any reasonable calculation, a threat to something made of stone. Alfharin had different ideas. He came in from the troll's blind side, the left, where the destroyed parapet section had left a gap in the creature's environmental awareness, moving with absolute silence on the sound-drinking bridge surface, and bit down hard on the troll's left heel. Not the flesh, which was stone-hard, but a specific point at the junction of foot and ankle, where even stone flesh had to flex for movement, where the material was thinner and less mineralized. The troll's reaction was immediate and involuntary, a sharp shift of weight, a momentary disruption of balance, the leg lifting in instinctive response to pain even when the pain was minimal. That moment was enough. Gandalf moved, Stella moved with him, and they crossed the space the troll had occupied in the second it spent responding to Alfharin's bite. The creature's arm came down behind them. Gandalf felt displaced air on the back of his neck, but made contact only with the bridge surface, sending cracks radiating from the impact point. The winch room entrance was exactly where Gandalf had hoped. A reinforced door set into the bridge's inner structure, protected by the same engineering that had kept the bridge intact for centuries. The cult hadn't bothered to lock it. They'd been using the troll as their security system, which had seemed adequate until approximately 20 minutes ago. Inside, machinery. Ancient, but maintained by the same magic that preserved the bridge's structural integrity. Great iron gears and wooden drums wound with chains massive enough to anchor ships, connected to mechanisms that controlled sluice gates in the bridge's foundations, and a portcullis that had once defended the gatehouse approach, and, critically, a vent, a shaft running vertically from the winch room through the bridge's superstructure to the surface, an engineering necessity for the original builders that now provided exactly what Gandalf needed. "The plan?" he said quickly, pulling Stella inside and beginning to examine the machinery with urgent focus. "Aragorn is at the ritual site. By now he's freeing the prisoners or fighting cultists, possibly both. We need to end the troll problem without killing it, because killing something like that in an enclosed space has consequences we don't want. The troll is territorial. What does territory mean to a territorial creature?" Stella processed this rapidly. "It means defined space, boundaries. A territory is somewhere they control, somewhere they feel safe. Outside their territory, they become defensive rather than aggressive." "Exactly. The troll's territory is the Undercroft, the foundation, the water below. It's not comfortable up here on the bridge. This isn't its natural environment. It came up because it was confused and agitated by the disrupted conditioning. If we can persuade it to retreat back to where it feels secure." "How do you persuade a troll of anything?" "The same way you persuade anything with territorial instinct," Gandalf said, finding what he was looking for in the machinery, a release mechanism for the sluice gates. "You make its preferred territory feel safe again, and you make its current position feel dangerous." He looked at the vertical vent shaft. "Stella, I need you to continue the disruption phrase, but change the pitch. Lower, slower. Make it sound like the Undercroft's natural resonance, the way it sounded before the cult modified it. Can you do that?" "I can try to approximate it. I was only down there briefly." "Approximate is sufficient. The troll's conditioning was built around that specific acoustic environment. If we can recreate something close to it and direct it downward through this shaft into the Undercroft, its instincts should pull it toward the sound." "And the dangerous position up here?" Gandalf's hand found the sluice gate release. "Water. Trolls don't fear water in itself, but corrupted water. Water that's been tainted by the cult's rituals contains enough residual alchemical disruption to be actively uncomfortable against stone flesh. The cult's own contamination of the river becomes our tool." He examined the mechanisms, tracing connections. "If I open the sluice gates fully, water from the corrupted river floods the Undercroft. Normally, that would drive the troll up and out. But combined with the acoustic signal pulling it toward its territory and the uncomfortable conditions up here on the bridge surface in daylight, away from its comfort zone, it goes down to deal with the water in its territory," Stella finished, understanding. "Territorial response overrides aggressive response. It goes home to defend its space rather than staying up here to fight us. In theory. Your plans involve a lot of theory." "The good ones always do. Begin the phrase, now, before the troll comes through that door." Stella began vocalizing, positioned over the vent shaft, sending sound downward into the bridge's interior. Gandalf worked the sluice gate mechanism, feeling resistance from age and disuse, forcing ancient gears to turn through sheer physical effort and 2 or 3 words of encouragement that were more than metaphorical. Outside, the troll struck the winch room door. The entire room shook, dust fell. A gear jumped its track, and Gandalf forced it back with language unbecoming a wizard of his standing. The second strike hit the door itself, and the ancient iron fittings bent but held, built to withstand siege. They were more than adequate against even a troll's frustration. Third strike. The sluice gates opened. The sound was immediate and dramatic. Water, lots of it, rushing through newly opened channels, flooding the Undercroft below, and through the vent shaft, bouncing off newly water-filled stone chambers, came the echo of Stella's approximated resonance, distorted by the flooding, changed in quality, but recognizable to instinct shaped over decades of territorial habit. The troll stopped hitting the door. Through the vent shaft they heard it. Massive footsteps, moving away from their position, moving toward the bridge surface breach it had created, moving down, going home. "It's working," Stella breathed, not stopping the vocalization. "Keep going," Gandalf instructed, "until we're certain." The footsteps descended, the bridge stopped shaking, and from below, the sound of the troll entering the flooding Undercroft, splashing, settling, the grinding of stone flesh against stone wall as it found its position and stilled. Territorial presence reasserted, intruders above its threshold of concern now that its space felt right again. Gandalf let out a long breath. "Right," he said. "The troll is managed. Now we deal with whatever Aragorn has gotten himself into at the ritual site." He opened the winchroom door. The bridge stretched north, empty of trolls, cultists scattered by the chaos. In the distance at the ruined northern span, shapes moved. Aragorn, freed prisoners, and the remaining cult presence that hadn't fled. The final confrontation awaited. They emerged from the winchroom into cold air and a changed landscape. The bridge surface was in worse shape than when they'd left it. The troll's emergence had cracked the roadway in 3 places, collapsed one parapet section entirely, and left impact craters where its fists had struck stone with full force. The structural integrity of the entire span was now questionable in ways it hadn't been an hour ago. Ahead, at the northern end of the bridge, where the intact span met the ruins of the collapsed section, the situation was immediately readable. Aragorn had reached the ritual site and had clearly been busy. 3 prisoners, the 5 the cult had kept closer to the ritual chamber, were partially freed, huddled against the inner wall of the ruined Gatehouse's remnant northern tower. 2 were upright and mobile. 3 were not. Aragorn himself was engaged with 4 cultists simultaneously, which under normal circumstances would have been concerning. Aragorn was not normal circumstances. He moved through the engagement with the particular economy of someone who has stopped thinking about fighting and simply fights, each movement serving multiple purposes, each position chosen to deny the cultists the angles they needed while maintaining his own options. But 4 was too many to manage indefinitely, and one of the cultists, larger than the others, moving with the practiced aggression of genuine combat experience rather than ceremonial training, was pressing hard on Aragorn's left side where the collapsed parapet left no retreat option. "Gandalf!" Aragorn called without breaking the rhythm of his engagement. "Chant leader is in the tower. Don't let them complete the secondary stanza." Gandalf didn't break stride. "Stella, the prisoners, get them moving south toward the winchroom. It's more structurally sound than this end. What about you? I'll be fine." He said it with the particular confidence of someone who has survived enough genuinely terrible situations to have calibrated their assessment of danger accurately. "Go." Stella went, moving at a careful run toward the huddled prisoners, keeping low, staying close to the inner wall away from the damaged parapets. Gandalf went toward the tower. Alfharin went toward Aragorn's situation, which the wolf had assessed with the rapid tactical clarity that made him invaluable in combat. He didn't engage the cultists directly. Experience had established that human opponents with bladed weapons were dangerous to engage head-on, and the wolf's value was in disruption rather than attrition. Instead, he drove hard at the large, experienced cultist threatening Aragorn's left, not biting, but hitting full body at leg height, sending the man stumbling sideways off his chosen line. It was enough. Aragorn's sword found the opening immediately, and the large cultist went down, no longer a problem. 3 remaining opponents recalibrated their approach, which gave Aragorn the half-second he needed to find better ground. The tower entrance was a low arch, the door long since rotted away, opening into a space that had once been a guardroom and was now the cult's improvised ritual chamber. The circle they'd established was still partially intact despite the chaos. Iron filings in the geometric pattern Gandalf had seen described in cult intelligence reports, the crown-like hoop mounted on a stand at the circle's center, and before the hoop a figure kneeling with the rigid posture of someone deep in ritual state. The vessel, the candidate for crowning. The chant leader stood behind the candidate, hands moving in the precise gestures of advanced ritual direction, voice maintained at the specific frequency the crowning ceremony required. To their credit, they hadn't broken despite the troll's eruption, the prisoners escaping, and the sound of active combat outside. Discipline, Gandalf acknowledged. Misapplied, corrupt, serving a terrible purpose, but genuine discipline. 3 other cultists flanked the circle, maintaining subsidiary chants that supported the leader's primary working. All 3 were aware of Gandalf's entrance. None broke their vocalization. They'd been instructed to hold, regardless. "Enough," Gandalf said. His voice carried the particular quality it acquired when he chose to use it as an instrument rather than merely communication, resonant, certain, filling the space completely. The subsidiary chants wobbled immediately. 2 held, 1 dissolved. The chant leader looked at him directly for the first time. Young, unexpectedly young, perhaps 30, with the eyes of someone who had convinced themselves so thoroughly of their cause's righteousness that doubt had become structurally impossible. Not stupid, not cruel in any simple sense. Genuinely, completely wrong in a way that was almost more disturbing than simple malice. "You don't understand what we're trying to restore," the chant leader said, maintaining their vocal pattern even while speaking, a considerable technical skill. "The seals are not protection, they're imprisonment. What's contained isn't dangerous, it's necessary. The world needs what was sealed away." "I've heard that argument," Gandalf replied, moving slowly along the chamber's edge, not threatening, just repositioning. "It's always the same argument. Whatever is locked away is always, according to those who want to unlock it, actually beneficial. The seal is always the real problem. What's contained is always misunderstood. Because it's true. Because that's what it tells you," Gandalf said. "What is sealed away is not without intelligence. It is not without the capacity to communicate, to suggest, to persuade. The fact that you believe it so completely is not evidence that you're right. It's evidence that it's very good at what it does." Uncertainty flickered in the chant leader's eyes. Just a fraction, just for a moment. Gandalf moved, not toward the chant leader, toward the circle itself. The iron filings that formed the geometric pattern were the ceremony's structural foundation. Without the circle, the acoustic patterns had nowhere to anchor. He brought his staff down at the circle's edge, not explosively, but with precise, controlled force, and spoke a single word in the old tongue. Not a word of power exactly, more a word of clarity, of revealing true structure. And the iron filings moved, not violently. They simply rearranged. The careful geometric pattern disrupted at its key nodes, the mathematical precision that gave the ritual its power suddenly containing errors that propagated through the entire structure. The kneeling candidate gasped and swayed. The crown hoop flickered with the particular light of disrupted magic. "Stop!" the chant leader commanded, abandoning the ritual tone entirely in their urgency. "You don't know what you're—" Aragorn came through the arch. He was breathing hard and had a cut along his jaw that was bleeding freely, but he was upright and functional, which meant the 3 remaining cultists outside were not. He assessed the room in one glance, identified the subsidiary chanters as the secondary threat, and moved toward them with calm efficiency. The subsidiary chanters broke. 2 ran through the arch, past Aragorn, taking the better part of wisdom and removing themselves from the situation at speed. The 3rd attempted something ceremonial with a ritual knife that demonstrated they had no practical combat experience, and Aragorn disarmed them without injury to either party, sending them stumbling after their companions. The chant leader stood alone now, the candidate still kneeling before the disrupted circle, the ritual's structure collapsing around them by slow degrees. Outside, Alfharin barked twice, the signal they'd established for approaching outside threats. More cultists coming, probably those who'd fled earlier and were now returning with reinforcements or simply courage recovered. "It's over," Gandalf told the chant leader. "The circle is broken. The vessel hasn't been crowned. Look at them. They're still themselves, still intact. Whatever partial working you managed has not completed. You can end this now." "It's not over," the chant leader said. "It's never over. We'll find another site, another crossing, another—" "I know," Gandalf said, and his voice carried genuine weariness. "I know you will. That's the tragedy of this. Not your failure here, but your certainty. You'll keep trying because you believe completely. And because you believe completely, no single defeat will stop you." He stepped forward and placed his hand on the crown hoop and spoke another word, longer this time, more complex, a word that unraveled the specific enchantment woven into the metal without destroying the metal itself. The hoop lost its ritual significance, becoming simply iron again. The chant leader watched this with an expression that moved through rage, grief, and finally something like exhausted resignation. Then they reached into their robes, produced a small object, a token of some kind, stamped metal bearing a symbol Gandalf didn't immediately recognize, and placed it deliberately on the disrupted circle's center. A message, a marker, left with the precision of someone who'd been instructed to leave it regardless of outcome. Then the chant leader walked past Gandalf, past Aragorn, through the arch and out onto the bridge, moving south at a measured pace that ignored the approaching cultists entirely. The cultists, seeing their leader moving away without apparent urgency, slowed their approach, confused. The chant leader didn't run, didn't look back, simply walked away with the particular dignity of someone who has accepted a setback while remaining unbroken in purpose. Aragorn started after them. Gandalf stopped him with a gesture. "Let them go," he said. Yes, they will. But not today. Not here. And not with this ritual. Today we won this. Tomorrow we worry about what the token means and where they're going next." He picked up the stamped metal token and examined it. "But this tells us something. This is deliberate intelligence. They wanted us to find this, which means either they're leading us somewhere or they're sending a message that requires us to find it." Aragorn looked at it, then at Gandalf. "Which is it?" "I don't know yet," Gandalf admitted, "but we'll find out." From the direction of the winch room, Stella's voice, calling to confirm the prisoners were secured and mobile. From below the bridge, the settling sounds of the troll returning to its interrupted rest. From the south, the sky was clearing, thin winter sunlight beginning to reach the corrupted river's surface. The bridge held. For now, The clearing sky was the first genuinely hopeful thing Gandalf had seen since they'd arrived at the bridge. Not bright sunshine. This was winter, and the sun at this latitude in this season was a muted, diffident presence even at its best. But it was real light, actual warmth, the kind that made you remember that cold and darkness were conditions rather than permanent states, which for their current purposes was exactly what they needed. Aragorn had recognized it too. "The sun angle," he said, coming to stand beside Gandalf at the bridge's edge, looking down at the structure's shadow on the black water below. "If we can get the troll positioned correctly, under the right section of the bridge, we need it back up here first," Gandalf said, "which means we need to undo what we just did, make the Undercroft feel threatening again, make the surface more appealing, or more accurately," he paused, working through the mechanics, "make it feel that the threat to its territory is up here rather than down there." "The prisoners," Stella said, joining them. She'd gotten the freed captives moved to the structurally sound middle section of the bridge and settled as comfortably as circumstances allowed. When the cult was performing the ritual up here, the resonance was pulling the troll upward. The ritual is broken now, but what if we could reproduce just enough of that acoustic pull to draw it back to the surface? "Without the actual ritual power," Aragorn said, "just the sound." "The troll's conditioning was built on acoustic triggers," Stella confirmed. "It doesn't need actual power, just the right frequencies to stimulate the conditioned response. I know enough of the cult's methodology to approximate the trigger harmonics." "You'd be deliberately agitating it," Aragorn noted, "drawing it up here where we need to fight it again." "We need to finish this," Gandalf said simply. "The troll neutralized temporarily is not the troll neutralized permanently. As long as it's down there, awake and territorial and connected to whatever the cult did to it, this bridge is impassable and this crossing is a cult asset. We need it dealt with properly." "Properly meaning petrified," Aragorn said. "Partially, at minimum. Enough that it can't function as a threat. Trolls exposed to sufficient direct sunlight undergo accelerated mineralization," Gandalf confirmed. "The process is already advanced in this one. Look at the crystalline formations we saw on its shoulders. It's been partially petrifying naturally for decades. Direct sunlight on the right sections will complete what time has already started." "The broken parapet where it emerged," Aragorn said, moving to examine the breach in the bridge surface. The troll's emergence had created an irregular opening roughly 8 feet across, through which the Undercroft below was visible, and through which, from the right angle, sunlight could potentially reach all the way to water level. "If we can get it standing in that gap, facing south." "The sun will do the rest," Gandalf agreed. "But we need it there, standing, not moving, for long enough to complete the process. Which means we need to hold it in position." "Chain," Aragorn said immediately, his mind already working the tactical problem. "There was chain in the winch room, anchor chain, massive links. If we can get a loop around one of its limbs and anchor the other end to the bridge structure." "While it's actively trying to kill us," Stella pointed out. "Yes, that is the complicating factor," Aragorn admitted. "Here's what we do. 3 rolls. Gandalf drives it with fire and light, not to harm, just to herd. Keep it oriented south toward the sun. I handle the chain. I need it distracted for about 10 seconds to get a loop secured. Alfharin is the distraction." The wolf, who had been listening to this exchange with his head tilted at an angle that suggested careful attention, gave a single short bark that conveyed something between agreement and resigned acceptance of a dangerous assignment. "And me?" Stella asked. "You do what you did in the Undercroft," the disruption phrase. "But this time, don't just disrupt. alternate. One measure of the cult's trigger harmonic to bring it where we need it, one measure of disruption to break the conditioned response so it's not fully directed. Keep it confused, reactive, responding to stimuli rather than acting on its own judgment. A confused troll is more manageable than a purposeful one. I understand the theory, Stella said. I'm considerably less confident about the execution, given that the confused troll in question weighs approximately as much as a house. Confidence is overrated, Aragorn told her. Competence is what matters, and you've demonstrated competence repeatedly today. Trust that. She absorbed this, then nodded once, a single decisive motion that said she'd made her choice and was committed to it. Stella began, positioned at the bridge's southern edge where she had maximum distance from the breach. The cult trigger harmonic emerged from her cautiously at first, then with more commitment as she found the right frequencies, lower than her natural singing range, with a specific rhythmic pattern that the cult had spent months training the troll to respond to. Below, in the Undercroft, silence, then movement. The troll heard it, registered it, and the conditioning, disrupted but not destroyed, fired in the way that months of systematic training produces. Not thought, not decision, but reflex. It came up, faster this time than before, as if the period of rest had restored something. The breach widened as it forced its way through, stone grinding against stone, and then it was on the bridge surface again. 9 feet of ancient territorial creature, pale eyes blinking against even the muted winter light, head turning to locate the acoustic source. Stella shifted immediately to the disruption phrase, breaking the harmonic pattern before the troll could fully orient. The creature's head swung the other way, confused, the conditioned response dissolving before it could direct behavior. Gandalf moved. Fire from the staff, controlled, directed, not aimed at the troll but at the ground around it, establishing a perimeter of heat and light on 3 sides that pressed it south, toward the gap, toward the angle of the winter sun. The troll recoiled from the fire instinctively, not from fear exactly, more from the sensory discomfort of a creature adapted to cold and dark, suddenly confronted with concentrated light and heat. It stepped south. Another step. Another. Alfharin came in at ankle height. 3 rapid strikes, snapping and retreating with perfect timing, keeping the troll's attention divided between the fire perimeter, the acoustic disruption, and the irritant at its feet. Not enough to seriously distract a creature that size, but enough to introduce one more variable into its processing. Aragorn moved. He'd retrieved chain from the winch room during Stella's initial vocalization. 30 feet of anchor chain, each link the size of a man's fist, weighing enough that carrying it had required genuine effort. He'd secured one end to a bridge buttress that geological surveys would have rated as capable of holding a ship in a storm. The other end he needed around the troll's ankle. This required being within arm's reach of something that could crush him without noticing. Aragorn had been in worse situations. He genuinely could not remember when, but he was confident they'd existed. He moved in the troll's blind spot, the same left side angle Alfharin had exploited earlier, moving with the absolute silence the sound-drinking bridge surface facilitated. The chain he dragged behind him, each link placed with care to prevent the metallic sound that would give him away. The troll took another step south, pushed by Gandalf's fire perimeter. Its left foot came down 18 inches from Aragorn. He looped the chain in a single fast motion, around the ankle, through itself, creating a friction lock that would tighten under load rather than slip. His hands moved with the practiced speed of someone who'd worked with rope and chain in field conditions for decades. 10 seconds, 8, 6, done. He rolled clear, moving fast, putting distance between himself and the moment the troll would feel the restraint. It happened almost immediately. The troll stepped north, away from Gandalf's fire, a sensible survival response, and the chain came taut. The creature looked down with the expression of something that has never been physically constrained by anything in its existence and is finding the experience genuinely surprising. It pulled. The buttress held. The chain held. Gandalf pressed the fire perimeter tighter, pushing south, keeping the troll in the sunlight that was now falling through the breach at exactly the right angle. Stella's disruption phrase kept its behavioral responses fragmented, preventing the decisive action that might have broken the chain or found a solution to the restraint. The sunlight touched the troll's left shoulder first. The crystalline formations there, the mineral deposits that had been accumulating for decades, caught the light and seemed to brighten from within. The natural petrification process that time had been conducting at glacial speed suddenly accelerated, visible to the eye as the stone flesh became less stone-like and more stone. The troll felt it. Something in its ancient awareness recognized what was happening. Not fear, exactly, but the instinctive resistance of a living thing to the approach of not living. It pulled against the chain again, more desperately this time, and Gandalf felt the moment approaching when desperation might translate to the kind of force that would break even anchor chain secured to even solid stone. He drove the staff into a crack in the bridge surface and spoke. Not a word this time, but a phrase, old and careful and precise, the kind of magic that required genuine knowledge rather than power. The chain didn't become stronger. The buttress didn't become larger. Instead, the loop around the troll's ankle became, in some structural sense that resisted easy description, more itself, more completely what a restraint was meant to be. The troll pulled, the restraint restrained. The sunlight moved across the troll's shoulders, its chest, its arms. Where it touched, the petrification completed, stone flesh becoming stone, the distinction between living mineral and inert rock dissolving permanently. The troll's movement slowed, its head lowered, its posture shifted from active struggle to something that looked almost like acceptance, the resignation of something very old that has finally reached the end of its particular road. It settled. Not collapsed. It remained upright, one hand resting on the bridge parapet, the other hanging at its side, but still, completely, finally still. The pale eyes remained open, fixed on some middle distance. Not empty. There was still presence there, still awareness. The process had not killed it in any straightforward sense. It had simply completed what time had been working toward for decades, returned it to the stone from which, in whatever ancient era this creature had first emerged, it had originally come, a monument, a warning, a feature of the bridge that would outlast every person currently standing on it. Gandalf regarded it for a long moment, leaning on his staff, genuinely tired in ways that had nothing to do with physical exertion. "Is it suffering?" Stella asked quietly, standing beside him. "No," he said. And then, more honestly, "I don't believe so. Creatures like this don't experience time the way we do. For it, this is less like death and more like very deep sleep, the kind that might end, given the right circumstances, in some future age when things are different. Will it? I don't know," Gandalf admitted. "I hope the world it wakes to, if it ever does, is one worth waking into." They stood in silence for a moment. Gandalf, Stella, Aragorn, who had joined them. Alfharin pressed against Gandalf's leg with the warmth of a companion who understood that some moments require presence rather than action. Then Aragorn said practically, "We have 8 injured prisoners, a structurally compromised bridge, and at least one escaped cult leader heading somewhere with deliberate purpose. We should move. Yes, Gandalf agreed, turning from the petrified troll. We should. The winter sun continued its low arc above the valley, casting long shadows from the troll's still form across the corrupted water below. The bridge held. The ritual site looked like the aftermath of a storm that had been specifically targeted at ceremonial objects. Iron filings scattered across the bridge surface, some caught in cracks between stones, some blown to the parapet edges by the displacement of air from the troll's movements. The crown hoop lay where Gandalf had left it, inert iron now, stripped of the enchantment that had given it purpose. Chalk markings that the cult had spent hours laying with careful precision were smeared and broken by the same chaos, but not entirely destroyed. Gandalf saw it immediately as they approached from the south, moving carefully over the bridge's compromised surface. The circle's primary geometry was disrupted. Yes, his intervention with the iron filings had broken the mathematical precision that the ritual required. But the cult had been thorough in their preparation. Secondary patterns, smaller and less obvious, had been inscribed directly into the bridge's stone surface rather than laid in movable materials. These remained intact, and the candidate was still there, still kneeling, still maintaining the rigid posture of someone in deep ritual state, which should have been impossible given everything that had happened: the troll's eruption, the chaos of combat, the breaking of the circle. People in genuine ritual trance didn't simply remain stable through structural mayhem. "They're not in trance," Stella said, reaching the same conclusion as Gandalf from a different direction. She moved toward the kneeling figure carefully. "Look at the breathing, too regular, too controlled, and the hands, the way the fingers are positioned. That's a maintained posture, not a spontaneous one. Someone is holding them in that state deliberately." "From a distance?" Aragorn asked. "From a distance, yes. If the secondary inscription patterns are still active, the primary circle was the power source, but the secondary patterns are the anchoring mechanism. Breaking the circle disrupted the ritual, but didn't release the hold on the vessel." She crouched beside the kneeling figure and studied their face. "They're aware. They can hear us. They just can't move." The candidate was a man, perhaps 45, with the calloused hands of someone who worked physically and the clothing of a prosperous craftsman rather than a scholar or soldier. Not cult, Gandalf realized with a cold clarity. Not a willing participant. Someone taken, prepared, positioned as a vessel without their consent. The ultimate perversion of the crowning ceremony, which, in whatever original form it had possessed, had presumably at least required the vessel's agreement. "Can you release him?" Gandalf asked Stella. "The secondary patterns are the problem. I need to disrupt them, and they're stone inscribed, so I can't simply move them like the iron filings. I need either time to work through the inscriptions carefully, or—" She paused, calculating. "Or the specific counter cadence from the corrective measure I studied in episode 5. The one clean measure that reverses ritual bindings. Use it. It will be heard," she warned, "by anyone in range. The cult uses acoustic monitoring at active ritual sites. It's standard practice. If there are any cultists still close enough, they'll know immediately that we're attempting a reversal." "There are," Alfharin confirmed in the only way available to him, a sharp, warning bark followed by a pointed look south toward the ruined Gatehouse approach. His ears were forward, tracking sounds too faint for human hearing. "How many and how close?" Aragorn asked, shifting into combat readiness with the fluid efficiency that was simply his natural state. The wolf's response indicated several, approaching, not immediately upon them, but moving with purpose rather than caution. returning rather than fleeing, which meant these were not the scattered remnants of the earlier fight but organized response. "The chant leader," Gandalf said. "They walked away, but they didn't go far. They waited to see if we'd attempt exactly this." He looked at the stamped metal token he still carried, turning it in his fingers. "This wasn't just a message, it was a delay tactic. Keep us focused on the token's meaning while they repositioned." "We've been played," Aragorn said without particular heat. "It was an assessment, not an accusation." "Partially," Gandalf agreed. "But being partially played doesn't mean we've lost. Stella, begin the counter cadence. Whatever comes, we hold position until the vessel is free." Stella took a breath, centered herself with visible effort, and began to sing. It was not a powerful sound. Her voice was untrained, the range limited, the technical execution imperfect in ways a genuine musical scholar would have cataloged at length. But the corrective measure she'd learned didn't require performance quality. It required knowledge, intent, and the courage to maintain it under pressure. She had all three. The effect on the secondary inscription patterns was visible almost immediately. The stone-inscribed markings, subtle enough that Gandalf had needed close examination to identify them, began to lose their definition, the precision of their lines softening as the binding logic they encoded encountered systematic contradiction. The candidate gasped, a sharp, involuntary sound of someone whose breathing had been controlled, for them suddenly recovering autonomy over their own lungs. From the south, movement. Cultists emerging from the Gatehouse ruins, 6 of them, plus the chant leader at their center, moving with the coordinated purpose of people who'd reorganized around a revised objective. No running, no aggression yet, approaching in the measured way that suggested they intended to reassert ritual control rather than engage in combat. Aragorn positioned himself between Stella and the approaching cultists. Alfharin took the flank. Gandalf remained beside Stella, staff raised, ready to respond to whatever the cultists attempted while not disrupting her work. "Keep going," he told her quietly. "Don't stop regardless of what happens." The chant leader stopped 20 feet away, regarding the scene with the assessing gaze of someone rapidly recalculating. Then they raised their hand, and their 5 accompanying cultists began a sustained chord. Not the crowning ceremony, something faster and more aggressive. A binding sequence, Gandalf recognized, intended to freeze rather than crown. Aragorn moved before the binding could establish, not toward the chant leader, toward the cultists on the left flank, disrupting the geometric formation their binding required. 2 cultists broke to engage him, which meant 2 stopped their vocalization, which meant the binding remained incomplete. Alfharin drove at the right flank simultaneously, not attacking, just forcing movement, making cultists step back and break their positions. Another voice dropped out of the chord. The binding attempt collapsed. The chant leader's expression shifted from calculation to something rawer, genuine frustration, which Gandalf found informative. They were under pressure from somewhere, operating on a timeline, needing this to work tonight rather than having the luxury of patience. "You're afraid of something," Gandalf said directly to the chant leader across the distance between them. Not an accusation, an observation, delivered with the particular quality that invited response. "Not of us, not of failing here, of what happens if you return to whoever sent you without the singer-carrier completed." The chant leader's eyes flickered. "That's why the token," Gandalf continued. "Not a message to us. A message to them, your principles, confirming you attempted, confirming the site was used, confirming you proceeded according to instruction even when it failed. You needed that confirmation left before we could interrupt, because without it, your report of failure has no evidence of genuine effort. "You understand nothing," the chant leader said. But the words came out slightly wrong, slightly too fast, with the brittleness of conviction being maintained under strain rather than resting on its own foundation. "I understand enough," Gandalf replied. "I understand that whoever you answer to is not patient and not forgiving of failure. I understand that you believe completely in your cause but are less certain about the people directing it. And I understand," he paused, letting the pause carry weight, "that somewhere between the cause you serve and the people you serve it with, there is a gap, a doubt, something that doesn't quite fit." Behind him, the candidate made a sound, not quite a word, not quite a cry, but the unmistakable vocalization of someone whose consciousness was returning to their own control. Stella's counter cadence was working. The chant leader took a step forward. Aragorn moved to intercept, and the cultists he'd been engaging repositioned, and for a moment everything teetered at the edge of open violence. Then Gandalf raised his staff and spoke, not a word of power, but a word of light, pure and simple and overwhelming. It flooded the bridge surface, too bright to look at directly, the kind of illumination that doesn't just reveal but somehow clarifies, making the corrupted markings on the stone surface visible as what they were, making the geometric patterns of the ritual obvious to everyone present, making the entire scene starkly, undeniably legible. In that light, the candidate collapsed forward, free of the binding, free of the ritual hold, simply a man kneeling on a cold bridge who needed someone to help him stand. Stella caught him, an entirely practical piece of assistance that was also, Gandalf thought, deeply symbolic, the former cultist supporting the person the cult had tried to destroy. The chant leader looked at the freed candidate, at the light, at the disrupted ritual site, and went very still. Then they reached into their robes, a motion that made Aragorn's hand go immediately to his sword, and produced not a weapon, but a second token, different from the first, smaller, darker metal, bearing a different symbol. This one they held for a moment, looking at it, then placed it deliberately on the bridge's parapet. Not left for Gandalf, left as an act of severance. "There are 6 more sites," the chant leader said. Their voice had changed, the ritual control stripped away, leaving something more ordinary and more tired underneath. "I won't tell you where, but there are 6, and I won't be going to any of them." They turned and walked away, south, alone, without their accompanying cultists, who looked at each other with the confused expression of people whose organizing principle has just departed. 2 followed the chant leader. 3 simply left in different directions. 1 sat down on the bridge surface and put their face in their hands. Aragorn watched them go. "Should we?" "No," Gandalf said. "Let them find whatever they're going to find. We have more important work." He moved to the parapet and picked up the second token, examining it. Different symbol, yes, but connected to the first. 2 parts of a larger cipher. 6 sites, he repeated quietly. And a cult whose leadership just lost one of their more competent field operatives. "Is that good?" Stella asked, still supporting the freed candidate who was beginning to orient to his surroundings with the confused relief of someone waking from a nightmare. "It's complicated," Gandalf said. "Organizations under pressure make different decisions than organizations operating confidently. Sometimes better, sometimes worse. We've created pressure. What comes from that pressure?" He pocketed both tokens. "We'll have to discover." He turned to the freed candidate. "Can you stand?" The man looked up at him with eyes that had seen things they hadn't expected to see. "I think so. Yes." He stood, unsteady but functional. "They were going to use me. I understood what they were doing. I couldn't stop it, couldn't move, couldn't speak, but I understood every word. I know, Gandalf said. I'm sorry we didn't reach you sooner. You reached me, the man said simply. That's what matters. On the bridge's northern end, the petrified troll stood in winter light, a new permanent feature of a very old structure. The corrupted river flowed below, still black, still wrong, but somehow less oppressive than before, as if the ritual's failure had taken some of its power with it. Alfharin pressed against Gandalf's leg, warm and present. Gandalf placed his hand on the wolf's head without looking down, and felt the wolf's steady breathing under his palm, alive, tired, unhurt. Good, he thought. That's the important thing. That's always the important thing. They gathered on the bridge's middle section, the most structurally sound portion remaining, as the winter afternoon began its early decline toward dusk. 8 survivors total. 3 from the Undercroft cages. Thomas, the young man who'd recovered enough to be actively useful, helping the others. Marta, the woman whose throat had been damaged by forced chanting, still unable to speak but alert and moving under her own power. And Mira, the girl who had the particular resilience of the young, who had processed her terror and emerged into a watchful, careful version of her previous self. 5 from the ritual chamber above, the craftsman Gandalf had freed, whose name was Aldrich, and 4 others in varying states of distress and physical deterioration. All alive, all in the important sense themselves, identities intact, memories intact, whatever the cult had attempted to do with them incomplete and reversible. Stella moved among them with the practical competence of someone who had finally found the right application for their knowledge, not performing cult rituals, undoing them. She checked each prisoner for residual binding effects, identifying 2 whose exposure to the ritual harmonics had left subtle acoustic trauma that would need careful management in the coming days. Her diagnosis was precise, her explanations calm, her manner toward people who had every reason to distrust anyone associated with the cult somehow exactly right, neither falsely cheerful nor grimly clinical. Gandalf watched her work and thought that whatever she'd been, whatever she'd done before she'd left the cult, she was making genuinely good use of the knowledge it had given her. Aragorn was doing what Aragorn did in aftermath situations: practical triage of supplies, structural assessment of their position, planning for movement before conditions deteriorated further. He'd examined the bridge's damage and concluded they could cross safely in the next hour if they moved carefully and avoided the sections the troll's emergence had compromised. After that, he reported to Gandalf, I wouldn't trust it. The structural integrity is degraded enough that temperature changes, tonight it will freeze, will accelerate the cracking. By morning, some of the damaged sections may be impassable. We need to be across before dark. Agreed. Have you found our next direction? Yes. Aragorn produced a scrap of material, not the tokens Gandalf carried, but something he'd found in the ritual chamber during the fight. Sewn into the lining of one of the cult's ritual bags. A partial map, but enough. It shows a location in the eastern hills, marked with the same iron and crown symbol we saw on the boundary stones here. Gandalf examined it. The map was crude but functional, showing relative distances and landmarks rather than precise cartography. The marked location was perhaps 3 days' travel at their current pace. A structure of some kind, indicated by a small tower symbol, positioned on high ground above a valley that Gandalf recognized from the broader regional geography he'd spent decades accumulating. A watchtower, he said, older than this bridge, and positioned on the Eastern King's Road, which means it predates the current political geography by several centuries. Whatever was built there was built when the king lines were different, when authority in this region ran along different channels. Cult significance? Potentially enormous, Gandalf said. If the seals respond to bloodline and authority, as we've seen at several sites, then a location tied to ancient king lines carries residual legitimacy that the cult could exploit. This isn't just another attempt. This is an escalation. They're moving towards sites with deeper, older significance. He tucked the map away carefully and picked up both tokens again, examining them side by side. The symbols on each were clearly related, different but sharing structural elements, the way letters share features with other letters in an alphabet without being identical. Two parts of a larger system, 6 sites, he murmured. And these tokens are a cipher, not a map, not a message in any conventional sense. A counting mechanism. They mark which sites have been attempted. Collect enough of them and you can read which sites remain, possibly in which order they're intended to be accessed. They left them deliberately, Aragorn said, knowing you'd pick them up. Yes, which means the cult's leadership wants us to understand the scope of what they're attempting, not to help us stop it, to demonstrate that we can't. 6 sites, each requiring separate action, each defended, each prepared. They believe the scale is beyond our capacity to address. Is it? Gandalf considered this honestly. Not beyond our capacity, but beyond our current resources if we approach each site the way we approached this one, reactive, with incomplete information, arriving barely in time. He straightened. We need to change our approach. Stop responding to where they've already been and start anticipating where they're going. The watchtower first, Aragorn said. The watchtower first, but differently than today. We arrive before they do, understand the site on its own terms, set conditions rather than interrupt them. Mira had drifted over during the latter part of this exchange, close enough to hear without quite intruding. Now she spoke with the directness of someone young enough to not have learned that certain questions weren't supposed to be asked. What happens if they succeed? At one of the other sites? Gandalf looked at her with the honesty that the question deserved. Then whatever is sealed at that site has a path toward freedom. Not immediately, not completely. The seals are layered, each one holding independently and in concert with the others. But each seal broken makes the remaining ones harder to maintain and the overall structure more vulnerable. Like a wall, she said. Knock out enough stones and the whole thing comes down. Like a wall, he agreed. Yes, she absorbed this. Then we'd better get moving. Alfharin, who had been resting against Gandalf's feet with the profound relaxation of an animal that has decided the immediate crisis is resolved, raised his head at Mira's words and looked at Gandalf with an expression that said, essentially, the child has a point. Indeed, Gandalf said. He reached down and rested his hand on the wolf's head, feeling the warmth there, the steady pulse of something alive and present and entirely on his side. Alpharin's eyes closed briefly at the touch, then opened again. Through their bond, something communicated that was not quite emotion and not quite information, but something that incorporated both. Readiness. Continued readiness despite the day's cost, despite the cold and the exhaustion, and the corrupted water still dried into the wolf's fur. Ready to go on. Good wolf, Gandalf said quietly. Good, brave wolf. Aldrich, the freed craftsman, had been sitting apart from the others, processing his experience with the interior focus of someone reviewing what had happened and deciding how to feel about it. Now he stood and approached Gandalf. The mark, he said, touching the side of his neck where, Gandalf could see, a faint scarring pattern had formed, the residue of the partial crowning, the echo of the ritual contact that had been established before the disruption. Will it fade? Gandalf examined it carefully. The marking was subtle. Most people would never notice it, and even attentive observers would likely read it as a birthmark or old scar rather than anything deliberate. But it was there. In time, he said. It's not a functional mark. It carries no power, exerts no influence. It's more like a scar from a wound that healed before it could complete its damage. It will fade, perhaps not completely, but significantly. But they could try again, Aldrich said. Not a question. They could, Gandalf admitted. But they would need to start the preparation entirely fresh. What they'd established with you is gone. I removed it thoroughly when I disrupted the circle. You are yourself, completely and without qualification. Whatever they attempted to make you into does not exist. Aldrich nodded slowly. I'm a carpenter, he said. I make things, furniture, frames, structures, things that hold other things up. He looked at the petrified troll standing at the bridge's northern end, the winter light casting long shadows from its still form across the damaged stone. That thing, it was part of what they were doing? Part of their defense? Yes. They agitated it deliberately, used it as a territorial weapon. And now it's stone. It was always stone, Gandalf said. In a sense, now it's simply more completely what it always was. Aldrich considered this. I'd like to go home, he said finally. Is that possible? Is it safe? We'll get everyone across the bridge and onto the south road before dark, Aragorn said, joining them. From there it's 4 hours to the nearest settlement, Thornfield, unless the cult's activities have affected it. I'll scout ahead and confirm it's clear. And if it isn't clear, then we find somewhere that is. Aragorn said it with the matter-of-fact certainty of someone for whom find an alternative is simply the next step rather than a crisis. The movement south began with the careful choreography of getting 8 people in various states of physical compromise across a structurally damaged bridge before the light failed. Aragorn led, testing the surface at each questionable section before waving others forward. Thomas helped support those who couldn't manage independently. Stella kept the group moving with a combination of practical instruction and quiet encouragement that she seemed to produce naturally. Alfharin brought up the rear, pacing behind the group with the patient attention of a sheepdog whose charges were human and considerably more fragile than the wolf's instincts were accustomed to managing. Gandalf walked in the middle of the group, unusual for him, but deliberate. He wanted to see everyone, assess the state of each person, watch for the signs of deferred shock that sometimes hit harder than immediate reaction. He studied the ritual marks that still decorated the bridge's stone surface as he walked over them. Corrupted wards, cult symbols, the remnants of the secondary inscription patterns Stella had disrupted. He was thinking about what the chant leader had said, 6 sites, and a cult whose leadership was pressing their field operatives hard enough that one of those operatives had chosen to walk away rather than continue. Organizations under pressure, different decisions. He'd told Stella it was complicated. It was. But complicated wasn't the same as hopeless, and pressure wasn't the same as defeat. And walking away from an abusive organization, even a wrong-headed, dangerous one, took a kind of courage that deserved at least the private acknowledgement that it existed. They reached the south end of the bridge as the last of the afternoon light went flat and gray. The land beyond was bleak and wet and cold, but it was blessedly uncorrupted. Ordinary earth, ordinary air, ordinary darkness falling in the ordinary way. Mira stopped at the bridge's edge and looked back. The petrified troll was visible even at this distance, a new feature of the ancient structure, standing where no feature had stood before. "It looks like it belongs there," she said. Like it was always supposed to be there. Gandalf stood beside her and looked. She wasn't wrong, he realized. The troll's form, massive, permanent, positioned with the unconscious rightness of something returned to its natural state, had a quality that felt less like accident and more like conclusion, as if the creature had always been moving toward this particular stillness, this particular place. "Perhaps it was," he said. Below the bridge, the corrupted river flowed on, still black, still wrong, but the wrongness felt less absolute than before, less permanent, as if the ritual's failure had introduced the possibility of correction, of gradual healing, of the water finding its way back to whatever it had been before the cult had touched it. It would take time, it would take more than one successful intervention, but it had started. "The road opens," Gandalf said quietly, more to himself than to anyone present. Alfharin pushed his head against Gandalf's hand, warm, solid, present. The road opened. They walked south into the gathering dark. 8 survivors and 4 companions, carrying with them the tokens of a cipher still being decoded, the knowledge of 6 sights still to be faced, and the particular stubborn hope of people who have won today and are already thinking about tomorrow. The bridge held behind them. The troll stood. The river flowed. And somewhere in the eastern hills, a ruined watchtower waited on high ground above an ancient valley, connected to king lines older than anyone currently living could fully trace, holding whatever it held with the patience of stone and time. They would get there first. They had to.